Hello everyone. I am the narrator, here to guide you through a story that is both strange and disturbing. I know many of you are watching this to drift off, to find peace in the night. But before we begin, if you are listening with me tonight, please leave a like and subscribe. I always appreciate each and every person on the other side of the screen, quietly listening to these unforgettable stories. Now, get comfortable, let your body relax and let your mind wander. I first noticed it before I saw it, the smell. A peculiar scent clung to the air outside my studio door, faint but unmistakable, paraffin wax, tinged with something chemically sweet and almost sickly. It hovered around a small cardboard box left abandoned there. No label, no return address. Only my name, scrawled in uneven, smeared black ink bleeding into the ridges of the corrugated surface like ink spilled from a fountain pen that ran dry. The hallway was deathly silent. My footsteps reverberated harshly, each step echoing like a warning clap in an empty warehouse. A shiver crept down my spine as I grasped the box and locked the door behind me. Its weight was negligible, as though it held nothing at all. I set it on the kitchen counter beneath the flickering bulb, its light wavering like a dying flame. Slowly, I cut the tape with my house key, half expecting some prank or forgotten delivery. Inside, nestled within layers of crumpled paper, lay a hand, human-sized, sculpted perfectly from pale, cracked wax. The surface was brittle, delicate, marred with tiny fissures as if kissed by heat and left to wither. The fingers curled gently into a loose fist, but something unnatural clung to the way they held themselves. At the wrist, a short steel pin jutted out like a broken bone. The metallic taste of iron flooded my mouth as I swallowed hard. This had to be a cruel joke, someone who tracked me down, sending a warning in wax and metal. But the air shifted. The faintest sound whispered through the apartment, a soft scraping, like dry leaves shuffling across linoleum. I froze, every nerve on edge. I scanned the room, shadows clung to corners, but no movement. When I turned back, the hand was different. It had opened. On the counter, salt crystals lay in a spiral pattern around the wax, each tiny grain shimmering faintly in the cold light. My pulse pounded. My breath shortened. Sweat prickled along my scalp. Instinct screamed to throw it out, but curiosity rooted me in place. I swept the salt away, wrapped the hand carefully in plastic, and shoved it into the darkest drawer in the kitchen. The plastic crinkled softly, a whisper like a voice under the bed. The apartment seemed to shrink around me. The ceiling lowered, walls closed in like wet skin. I forced myself to work, though every glance over my shoulder revealed shifting shadows. Later, when sleep finally claimed me, the city outside was a dull hum. I left the hallway light on. Tap, tap, scrape. The noise dragged me from dreams, a buzzing in my veins. Heat rose in my chest. Tongue dry, stuck to the roof of my mouth. The sound came from the living room floor. I crept out, bare feet cold against the floorboards. Moonlight spilled through the window and fell on something pale near the couch. The wax hand sat upright on its palm. Its 5 fingers flexed and kneaded the floor, slow and deliberate, like a cat waking from a deep sleep. Salt trickled from an unseen crack in the wrist, pooling in thin, curling trails. The trails folded into strange, looping symbols that twisted and forked beyond my understanding. Frozen, I watched one index finger trace a reversed 3. Another finger dragged a line beneath it, then crossed it again, forming crude letters. A shudder rattled through me, breath caught tight between clenched teeth. I wanted to snatch the hand and hurl it outside, but my body betrayed me. I was rooted in place, powerless. I fled to the bathroom, locked the door, and sank onto cold tiles. Dizzy and shaking, I counted my breaths, trying to reclaim control. An hour later, I cracked the door. The hand lay motionless again. The salt markings remained. I gathered the salt with trembling hands, swept it into a dustpan, and threw it into the garbage chute. I scrubbed under my nails, flushing grains of salt away, hoping to wash away the creeping dread. Sleep came in broken shards. Every time my eyes snapped open, I imagined the hand inching closer, scratching at the floor, writing its silent demands. Morning light was gray and heavy. The hand had vanished from the living room. I found it in the kitchen sink, fingers splayed, wrist tilted toward the ceiling. Salt circled the drain in precise arcs. Confused, I tugged open the drawer where I'd hidden the wrapped hand. It was still there, untouched, tightly sealed in plastic. Logic fractured. I felt my mind bending, about to snap. I wrapped the hand in a paper bag and carried it outside, to the dumpster behind the building. The lid slammed shut with the finality of a coffin door. Inside, I scrubbed the sink until my fingertips wrinkled. Bleach burned my skin, but the paraffin smell lingered, thick and suffocating. To distract myself, I dove into research, wax effigies, salt warding, automatic writing. I scoured ancient folklore tied to mirrors, portals, thresholds, places where worlds might thin and bleed. Each discovery felt like a splinter under my skin. That night, the scratching began earlier. While brushing my teeth, the sound scraped beneath the floorboards, slow and deliberate. The days that followed became a spiral into darkness. The hand was no longer a static object but a sinister presence moving through the apartment like a living shadow. Each night, strange occurrences multiplied. Mirrors fogged, reflecting impossible shapes just behind me. Shadows stretched unnaturally, reaching out like fingers. A whisper curled through the halls, soft words in a language I couldn't decipher, luring me toward locked doors. One evening, as a storm raged outside, I awoke to the sound of glass breaking. The wax hand was gone from its hiding place. In its place, the window was cracked, jagged as if clawed from the inside out. I found faint footprints trailing in a spiral on the floor, salt dust imprinted with tiny ridges, leading toward the basement door, which had always been locked. Drawn by dread and curiosity, I forced the lock and descended. Below, the air was thick with cold and something older, an ancient sorrow. On the floor, a circle of salt surrounded a cracked mirror, its surface shimmering like liquid darkness. The wax hand lay on the floor, fingers spread wide, pointing at the mirror. A low humming filled the room, like a voice trapped beneath ice. The mirror's surface rippled. In it, I saw not my reflection but a corridor stretching into infinite shadows. A hand, real, flesh and bone, reached out from the darkness, beckoning me to step through. I recoiled, heart hammering, breath ragged. The words, "Open the door," echoed in my mind, not from my voice but something deeper. The boundary between reality and nightmare blurred. Night after night, the wax hand's movements grew more purposeful, the salt symbols multiplying in complexity. They formed cryptic sigils that pulsed faintly under moonlight, summoning something older than time. I realized the hand was a key, not merely an object, but a conduit. One night, the whispering voices crescendoed into a scream that shattered glass and sanity alike. The apartment trembled as if waking from a deep slumber. Shadows pooled and gathered, coalescing into vague, shifting forms. The wax hand climbed from the floor and pressed against the wall where a previously unnoticed doorframe appeared. The door swung open slowly. A chill rushed out, freezing blood in my veins. Beyond lay a realm twisted by shadows and memories, a place where lost souls wandered and time had no meaning. I stood on the threshold, the hand beckoning silently. This is where my story pauses. If you ever receive a gift that reeks of wax and salt, do not ignore it. Do not underestimate the quiet things that crawl closer when you close your eyes. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. And some hands, though made of wax, hold the weight of ancient darkness. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from tonight? What time is it? May your dreams be free from shadows. The air thickened with dread as I stared into the mirror's warped depths. Every instinct screamed to break free, yet I was frozen, trapped in a space where reality bent like cracked glass. The stranger's eyes, unblinking and too wide, bore into mine, a silent summons from the other side. My breath hitched. The cracked salt lines on the floor seemed to pulse beneath my feet, a slow heartbeat syncing with my own. The wax hand was no longer confined to frozen darkness, it was alive in every shadow, in every reflection, pressing at the veil between worlds. Desperation clawed at me. I reached for the broom, but my fingers trembled as the reflection shifted once more. The taped hand at the freezer's edge moved, just a fraction, enough to shatter the fragile barrier of safety I'd built. A cold wind whispered from the cracked window, carrying a voice like dry leaves scraping stone. "Open the door." The words echoed in my mind, relentless and suffocating. I understood then, the circle wasn't just a ward, it was a threshold, and the hand was the key. No amount of salt or tape could hold back what longed to cross. Darkness pooled in the corners of the room, growing, breathing, waiting. I was no longer the observer. I was the gatekeeper standing on the cusp. And the door was already opening. The night thickened around me like a shroud, every breath a struggle. The whispers from the cracked window grew louder, brushing against my ears like skeletal fingers. "Open the door, open the door." I dared not move, but my body betrayed me, a slow, inexorable pull toward the mirror. The surface rippled like liquid mercury, and behind the stranger's waxy gaze, dark shapes writhed, barely glimpsed but ever present. The wax hand, bound yet alive, tugged faintly against the spatula, as if desperate to break free and join whatever lurked beyond the glass. I backed away, heart pounding in a frenzy, but the room began to twist, the walls bending inward, shadows lengthening and thickening, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling. The salt line I tried so hard to maintain lay broken in places, shimmering faintly where it dissolved, a fragile thread on the edge of snapping. Then, a sudden crash, the freezer door burst open with a violence that rattled the entire apartment. Ice shards flew like frozen shards of a shattered dream, and the wax hand leapt free, crawling swiftly toward the mirror. I grabbed a shard of ice from the floor, desperate, shaking. The hand paused, fingers flexing in slow, deliberate rhythm, almost taunting. As I raised the ice, the mirror cracked, a spiderweb of fractures spreading outward, distorting the stranger's face into grotesque patterns. The whisper turned to a scream, a cacophony of lost voices, begging, pleading, calling. And then, silence. Only the sound of my ragged breathing filled the room. The door was open. I was no longer alone. The room plunged into an eerie silence, heavy and suffocating, as if the very air held its breath. The cracked mirror reflected shattered shards of my own terrified face, fractured and distorted. Beyond those jagged lines, the darkness pulsed, alive and hungry. The wax hand moved with unnatural purpose, its fingers clawing the floorboards as it advanced toward the gap in the salt circle, the threshold I had failed to seal. The faint glow of streetlights seeped through the curtains, casting long, trembling shadows that danced like specters on the walls. My heart hammered against my ribs as panic clawed its way up my throat. I grabbed a kitchen knife, its cold steel a fragile defense against the unknown. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet a force held me rooted, an invisible tether woven by dread and fascination. As the hand crossed the threshold, the temperature plummeted. Frost crept along the edges of the furniture, tendrils of ice reaching like skeletal fingers. The lights flickered, and a low, guttural whisper slithered through the room, echoing in the hollow spaces of my mind. A figure began to emerge from the depths beyond the broken mirror, its form blurred and shifting, a silhouette of darkness edged in flame-like flickers. Its eyes, empty voids glowing faintly, locked onto mine. "Open the door," it hissed, voice like the rustling of dead leaves. The salt line cracked beneath its touch, shards scattering like fallen stars. The protective barrier was breaking. Summoning every ounce of courage, I dashed toward the shattered mirror, raising the knife. The figure recoiled, a shriek tearing through the air, a sound both alien and painfully human. With a desperate cry, I drove the blade into the glass. The mirror exploded inward, shards spraying like frozen glass, and the room was swallowed by darkness. When my vision cleared, the mirror was gone, replaced by an empty void, silent and still. The wax hand lay shattered in fragments on the floor, lifeless. For a moment, I believed it was over. But the shadows whispered still, promising the door was never truly closed. My scalp tightened so fiercely it hurt, a sharp grip that rooted me in place. I spun toward the freezer, heart hammering, yet the door remained shut, solid and indifferent. When my eyes flicked back to the mirror, the other apartment had darkened further, swallowed by an impenetrable haze that hummed with static. There, in the wavering gloom, a figure stood, tall and impossibly thin, its features blurred and distorted, lost in shadow and static like a broken transmission. My breath hitched, freezing in my throat. I stumbled backward, ribs aching with the sudden weight of panic. The reflection tilted its head, slow, deliberate, as though contemplating the fragile seam between our worlds. A brittle crack echoed from inside the glass, reminiscent of peeling old paint, sharp and foreboding. Theo's warning came rushing back, the frames, the boundaries. Without them, the veil thins, without structure, the darkness leaks. I yanked the mirror from the wall with desperate force, hurling it face down onto the floor. The glass shattered with a gunshot pop, silver shards scattering across the floor like spilled mercury. Each fragment reflected miniature copies of my studio, countless doorways, countless thresholds, each one a potential passage. Panic surged like wildfire. My hands tore through the shards, cutting my palms as blood dotted the plastic trash bag I'd grabbed. Wrapping the bloody mess in towels, I stuffed it into the deepest closet corner and wedged a chair against the door. Every instinct screamed that this was not containment but a temporary delay. Inside the freezer, the wax hand drummed faster against its icy prison. The compressor clicked off, and stillness seeped into the apartment, heavy and thick as tar. Dawn crept through the ceiling, casting pale gray light across the room. The distant hum of the city returned, but the air within remained dense, like the apartment had inhaled deeply and refused to exhale. I opened the freezer. The hand lay inert, glazed with ice crystals that sealed the tape binding it to the spatula. Taking a deep breath, I poured lighter fluid over the frozen bundle and struck a match. Flames licked the wax, softening it into a pale, sizzling sludge that hissed and popped against the metal tin beneath. I scraped the cooled remains into the tin, snapping the lid shut before carrying it 3 blocks to a construction dumpster brimming with concrete dust. The dull clang as the tin landed was swallowed by rubble and silence. Back home, I vacuumed every trace of salt, scrubbing until my fingertips cracked and bled. Exhaustion pinned my eyelids, but the apartment gleamed with an eerie cleanliness, almost ordinary. Yet the broken mirror lingered behind the closet door, a silent sentinel pressing against my thoughts. I dozed on the couch, sunlight spilling in late afternoon, painting golden rectangles across the floor. At the center of one lay a single grain of salt, gleaming like a sliver of quartz. My breath caught in my throat. Beside it, a faint wax smear, like a fingernail dragged softly across the wood. My mouth dried, heart constricted. I checked the freezer. Empty. The kitchen drawer. Empty. Yet the paraffin scent returned, drifting faintly on the breeze from the air conditioner. Near the closet, a gentle tapping broke the silence, soft knuckles rapping against glass. The salt grain quivered, rolled in a tiny circle, then stopped, pointing toward the closet door. I stepped back, calves hitting the couch. The room seemed to widen, expanding impossibly as if invisible corridors opened behind every wall, waiting, watching. My heartbeat pounded at the base of my skull. The tapping grew rhythmic. For slow knocks, a pause, for again. An invitation cloaked in patience. I don't know if the ritual ever truly needed the wax hand or if it required only my attention, my fear, my willingness to intervene. The circle may have closed when I shattered the mirror, trusting the glass over the primal warnings beneath my skin. Every reflective surface still holds a shard of that door, and somewhere beyond the thin walls, I sense hinges creaking, waiting to swing open. I leave the lights on now, but brightness only sharpens the edges of shadows. At night, salt slides softly across the wood floors I've scrubbed clean. I count heartbeats until dawn, praying each morning arrives before the final line is drawn. Because once the door beyond the mirror opens fully, I fear there will be nowhere left to run. Only endless reflections, each one waiting to claim what crosses its frame. Story 2. I felt the desert long before I saw it. An oven-hot breath pushed through the open door of the gas station diner, settling on my face like a damp cloth. The air tasted of old copper and motor oil. My bus had died 2 towns back, stranded me on a rattling stretch of highway whose asphalt shimmered as though hiding coals beneath its skin. When the tanker truck hissed to a stop outside, the ground trembled just enough to rattle the coffee in my cup. I told myself I had no other choice. I felt the desert long before I saw it. An oven-hot breath pushed through the open door of the gas station diner, settling on my face like a damp, suffocating cloth. The air tasted of old copper and motor oil, thick with dust and forgotten prayers. My bus had died 2 towns back, stranded me on a rattling stretch of highway whose asphalt shimmered unnaturally, as though the sun baked coals just beneath its cracked surface. The road seemed to hum, an unspoken warning buried in the static heat. Outside, the tanker truck hissed to a stop, tires grinding against gravel. The ground trembled faintly, rattling the coffee in my chipped ceramic cup, the aroma mingling with the acrid scent of diesel and desert dust. I told myself I had no other choice. The diner was a relic, half forgotten beneath peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that buzzed with intermittent life. Inside, the air was thick with stale grease and loneliness. The few patrons glanced up briefly, faces etched with dust and secrets, and returned to their cups, the silence heavy and watchful. I settled into a cracked vinyl booth, the vinyl sticking to my skin under the oppressive heat. The waitress, a woman whose name tag read Marge, but whose eyes held centuries of weariness, approached with a slow, deliberate step. "Bus trouble?" she asked, voice low and tired. I nodded. "Stranded." She smiled thinly, her gaze flickering to the window where the highway stretched endlessly, shimmering like a mirage. "Not much help out there." Her words hung in the air, weighted with something unspoken. As I sipped lukewarm coffee, a radio behind the counter crackled with static and faint voices, snatches of an old folk song mingled with a man's distorted voice reciting numbers, coordinates, or perhaps a code. My eyes drifted outside. The desert rolled vast and silent, but in its stillness, I sensed movement, shadows flitting just beyond the heat haze, figures watching from the barren scrub. A low whistle drifted from the diner's jukebox, distorted and mournful. Marge wiped her hands on a rag, her eyes meeting mine. "This place," she said softly, "it's got a way of holding on to people. Some say it's the desert. Others, well, they say it's something older." I felt the weight of her words settle deep into my bones. That night, I slept in the back room of the diner, windows shuttered tight against the desert chill. The air was thick with silence, yet beneath it, I could hear a subtle pulse, like the heartbeat of the land itself, slow and relentless. Dreams came unbidden, a vast expanse of cracked earth, endless and barren, yet dotted with faint glowing symbols that writhed beneath the surface. Whispers called my name in voices not quite human, ancient and haunting. When dawn crept over the horizon, bleeding gold into the sky, I awoke to find a small, weathered talisman on the windowsill, a twisted ring of bone and silver, cold and heavy in my palm. Marge was gone. Outside, the highway stretched out empty, but the heat shimmered with unnatural intensity. I knew then that I was no longer merely stranded. The desert had claimed me. The desert's sun climbed higher, its relentless gaze burning away the morning mist, revealing a landscape both barren and strange. The highway stretched endlessly, wavering like a mirage shimmering with secrets just out of reach. The talisman weighed heavy in my palm, its cold touch a reminder that this place was not ordinary. I stepped outside the diner, the gravel crunching beneath my worn boots. The silence was absolute, save for a faint whispering carried on the dry wind, voices that seemed to echo from the very earth itself, speaking in a language that stirred something deep and ancient within me. The sky above was an unyielding blue, yet the air pulsed with an energy that felt alive, watching, waiting. I knew I had to move, to find the source of the whispers, to uncover what had tethered me to this forsaken stretch of highway. As I walked, the heat waves danced like specters, bending the horizon and twisting familiar shapes into the grotesque and uncanny. Shadows stretched long and distorted, cast by forms that vanished when I blinked, ghostly echoes of travelers who had passed this way long ago, or perhaps never truly left. The talisman pulsed faintly against my skin, guiding me, pulling me forward. I reached a rusted sign, its paint faded and cracked, barely legible, "Welcome to Dry Creek, population unknown." A shiver ran through me despite the heat. Beyond the sign, the road forked into two paths, both swallowed by the desert's vast emptiness. The left path wound toward a cluster of crumbling buildings, their outlines blurred by dust and time. The right path disappeared into a canyon whose shadows spilled cool and inviting against the unforgiving sun. The whispers grew louder, weaving through the wind like a siren's song, compelling me toward the canyon. I hesitated, feeling the weight of unseen eyes pressing upon me from both directions. Then, a flicker caught my eye, a figure standing at the canyon's mouth, tall and slender, draped in tattered robes that billowed even though the air was still. Its face was obscured by a hood, but the presence was undeniable, ancient and sorrowful. The figure raised a hand, beckoning silently. I stepped forward, heart pounding, knowing that this path was a crossing, a threshold into the unknown. With every step, the desert seemed to shift beneath my feet, the sand whispering secrets of forgotten rituals and lost souls. The canyon's depth swallowed the daylight, and as I descended, the air grew cooler, tinged with the scent of sage and something darker, something waiting. A faint glow emanated from the walls, revealing symbols etched into stone, pulsing with an otherworldly light. The whispers coalesced into words I could almost understand, a warning and a promise intertwined. Beware the door that opens without key, the price of passage is not measured in coin. I pressed on, each heartbeat echoing against the silence. At the canyon's end, a heavy wooden door stood embedded in the rock, ancient and unyielding. The talisman pulsed fiercely now, resonating with the door's weathered surface. The slender figure reappeared beside me, voice a rasping breath. Once opened, the desert never forgets. My hand trembled as I reached for the iron ring. The door groaned open, revealing a darkness that stretched beyond sight, a void both terrifying and strangely familiar. I stepped inside, knowing that what awaited would change everything. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, a chill unlike any I'd felt in the desert's blazing heat washed over me. Darkness swallowed me whole, yet beneath the blackness was a presence, vast, endless, waiting. The air hummed with a quiet resonance, like the steady heartbeat of the earth itself, deep and slow. I fumbled for the talisman, its cold weight grounding me as shadows flickered at the edges of my vision. Shapes coalesced into figures, twisted, ethereal forms that floated silently in the void, their eyes hollow and sorrowful. They did not speak, but their anguish echoed in the silence, a silent chorus of forgotten souls trapped between worlds. The slender figure from the canyon stood beside me, its robe billowing as if stirred by an unseen wind. "You have entered the Vale," it whispered, voice low and gravelly, "a place where time is fractured and memories bleed into dreams." I swallowed, heart hammering as unseen hands seemed to brush past me, cold and insistent. The talisman pulsed again, its glow faint but steady, illuminating a path through the darkness, a narrow trail of shimmering dust that beckoned deeper into the void. Each step felt heavier, as if the weight of countless unseen eyes bore down upon me. Whispers rose, unintelligible at first, then sharpened into fragments of voices long lost to time. "Not all who wander find the way back. The desert claims those who listen too closely. The price of passage is paid in forgetting." I stumbled, breath shallow, but pressed forward, drawn by a force I could neither resist nor understand. Ahead, a faint light shimmered, soft and golden, pooling beneath a stone altar etched with ancient symbols. On the altar lay a cracked hourglass, sand frozen mid-fall, shimmering with an unnatural light. The slender figure's voice softened. Time here is both weapon and prison. To move forward, you must surrender what you carry most dearly. My fingers tightened around the talisman as the weight of the moment crushed me. I knew then that this journey was not just through the desert, but into the deepest parts of myself, where fear and memory entwined in a fragile dance. With a trembling breath, I reached out to touch the hourglass, ready to pay the price. The truck's low rumble thrummed beneath me like a heartbeat out of sync, a dull throb that seemed to pulse with the weight of unspoken things. Inside the cab, the stale scent of scorched metal mingled with something faintly floral, old lilacs, or perhaps the ghost of a memory I couldn't place, twisting my stomach into uneasy knots. The driver, his pale eyes flicking between the road and the tachograph, spoke again in that calm, hollow voice. We're not moving forward. Each mile we lose is a memory shed, a fragment slipping away. Rebecando Limbrances, unspooling shadows. The desert holds them close, waits until they surface. I swallowed hard, trying to catch my breath as the shapes behind us shimmered and bobbed like fragile phantoms tethered to the truck's trailing end, silent passengers on a journey into oblivion. Their outlines blurred, some stretched grotesquely sideways, others upright and still. I felt the driver's warning echo in my mind, better not to look too long. They might be familiar. A static-laced whisper rolled from the radio, the reversed lullaby curling inside my ears, squeezing the space around my thoughts until only shards remained. My name echoed within the twisted notes, a fractured echo of identity unraveling, slipping further into the void. Outside, the sun bled purple into night, and the desert shadows stretched long and monstrous, distorting reality's edges. The road ahead was a narrowing tunnel carved by headlights, beyond which darkness pooled thick and alive. I dared not glance behind again, but the mirror betrayed me. The silhouettes had multiplied, dense as oil slick, pressing against the boundaries of the rail. The driver's voice broke through the haze, the desert doesn't forget. It waits, patient and endless. It will claim what's left behind. The truck kept moving backward through time, through memory, and I sat frozen, caught between the fading light and the endless dark, with nothing but those ghostly shapes trailing behind, and the heavy weight of all I could not leave behind. The road unraveled beneath the tires like a thread pulled loose from the fabric of time itself. Each backward mile felt heavier than the last, laden with memories I hadn't yet surrendered. The truck's engine hummed a dirge, steady and unyielding, as if mourning all that was slipping through my fingers. The driver's pale eyes never left the road, but his voice lowered to a murmur. You can't outrun the desert, or what it remembers. It holds your past tight, folds it into the dust. And when the time comes, it will give it back, changed. I swallowed the lump in my throat, fingers tightening around the edge of the seat. The shapes behind us grew denser, pressing against the limits of vision, like an oil spill threatening to engulf the highway. I caught glimpses of faces, blurred, incomplete, haunted. Some seemed eerily familiar, as if fragments of my own forgotten history lingered there. The radio hissed and warped, chanting phrases I couldn't quite catch, syllables looping in and out of clarity. The lullaby reversed, slow and distorted, tugged at some buried corner of my mind. A whisper slipped through the static, my name, fractured and fragmented, dissolving into the night air. A sudden jolt threw me against the door. The tachograph's numbers flickered, negative kilometers counting down relentlessly. I looked to the driver, who simply nodded. Every mile lost is a piece of you surrendered. Soon, there's nothing left but the road. Outside, the horizon folded into itself. The stars above shimmered like distant flames, but the desert below writhed, alive with shadows twisting and reaching. The shapes trailing behind the truck grew restless, jerking and writhing with a life of their own. I felt a cold seep into my bones, a creeping chill that defied the desert's heat. The air grew thick with whispered voices, tangled with the hum of the engine. Remember, the driver said quietly, the desert's memory is endless. And sometimes, it chooses to remember you. The night deepened. The backward journey pressed on, the shadows closing in. Somewhere ahead, the road would end, or perhaps it would circle back to where it began, a place not marked on any map, a threshold between what was and what never was. And I was riding toward it, tethered to the past by ghosts I couldn't abandon. The door resisted, fused by unseen flames, but I gripped the handle tighter, sweat slicking my palms. A searing heat blazed through my fingers, blistering skin peeling back, yet I wrenched it downward with desperate strength. The latch gave way with a tortured screech, revealing a thinning veil between worlds, a threshold of molten light and shadow. Behind me, the silhouettes surged, no longer faint ghosts but vivid specters pressed close, faces half-formed, mouths silently screaming the names of regrets long buried. My younger self, clutching that broken toy truck, stared back with hollow eyes full of sorrow and fear. The driver's voice was calm, a murmur against the chaos. The first hooks always hurt. But fight the pull, and the barbs deepened. I didn't answer. Adrenaline shoved me forward through the open door into the churning heat and shifting sands beyond the cab. The world twisted, gravity bending sideways, and the truck's growl faded to a distant echo. The desert stretched infinite, stars burning cold and sharp overhead. The shadows pressed against me still, whispering regrets, promises, and warnings. The tachograph's count faded from my mind, replaced by the rhythm of my ragged breathing and pounding heart. I had broken free from the cab, but now I stood at the edge of something far older and more unforgiving, a place where memories bled, and time unraveled. The driver's words echoed faintly, choose surrender or dissection. I took a trembling step forward, swallowed fear tight, and faced the desert's endless night, knowing the road behind was lost forever. The desert night stretched vast and merciless before me, a canvas smeared with cold stars that pierced the blackness like distant fires. The wind whispered ancient secrets, carrying the scent of forgotten graves and scorched earth. Behind, the truck's fading growl was swallowed by the silence, leaving only the weight of the shadows pressing close. Each step I took sank into sand that felt too cold beneath my boots, a biting contrast to the burning pain still raw on my blistered hand. The silhouettes trailed me, no longer tethered to the truck but free to glide across the dunes, murmuring fragments of memories I dared not fully hear. Their voices were a dissonant symphony of loss and longing, weaving through the night air like threads of smoke. Ahead, a faint light shimmered, a wavering beacon that seemed both welcoming and warning. As I moved closer, the glow resolved into a weathered archway half buried in sand, carved with runes that pulsed softly with an eerie blue light. The archway framed a swirling portal, depths of shadow and flame twisting within like a restless spirit. The driver's calm words echoed in my mind, the price of passage is paid in forgetting. I hesitated, heart thrumming like a wild drum. To step through meant surrender, to relinquish what tethered me to the world I knew, to lose pieces of myself in the desert's eternal memory. But to turn back was to remain forever caught between, a ghost bound to the road's endless rewind. Gathering what remained of my courage, I stepped through the archway. The world twisted and folded, time unraveling like a threadbare tapestry. Light fractured into shards, and I felt myself dissolve into a cascade of echoes, moments, memories, regrets, scattering like dust on the wind. When the spinning ceased, I stood alone on the far side, beneath a sky unknown, where the desert stretched endless and silent, but I was no longer the man who had entered. Some part of me had been left behind in the shadowed highway, claimed by the desert's unyielding hunger. I was reborn into the waiting silence, carrying only the faintest trace of what once was. The air here was different, thicker, almost viscous, each breath a slow, deliberate act. The sky above was not the familiar dome of stars but a swirling canvas of shadow and light, shifting with hues that defied naming. The desert stretched endlessly, but the sands gleamed like crushed glass, sharp and cold beneath my feet. Around me, silence reigned, but it was not peaceful. It pressed against my mind, a heavy weight of expectation and ancient sorrow. The horizon twisted, revealing impossible landscapes, mountains folding into themselves, rivers flowing backward, trees growing roots upward into the sky. Figures moved at the edge of vision, neither fully formed nor entirely absent. They flickered like dying flames, remnants of lost souls trapped between worlds. Some reached toward me, their hands outstretched with silent pleas or accusations, others simply watched, their eyes reflecting endless nights. The ground beneath me pulsed faintly, as if breathing, alive with a rhythm both alien and familiar. I realized this place was not merely a desert but a realm between realms, a liminal space where memories, regrets, and forgotten truths coalesced. Ahead, a path of shimmering dust led toward a distant light, soft and inviting yet tinged with something cold and unyielding. I felt drawn, as though compelled by unseen forces to walk forward. Along the way, whispers echoed, snatches of conversations, laughter long silenced, cries of despair. Each step stirred fragments of my own past, moments I had buried deep, regrets I had never faced. The talisman in my pocket pulsed faintly, a beacon and a tether. It seemed to resonate with the landscape, guiding me but also reminding me of the price yet to be paid. As I approached the light, a figure emerged, a woman cloaked in shifting shadows, her face obscured yet her presence commanding. She spoke without words, her voice a melody that echoed inside my mind. To walk this path is to unmake and remake yourself. What will you surrender to cross fully into what awaits? Her question hung in the air, heavy with consequence. The new realm held both promise and peril, a place where the self could be shattered and reforged, where time folded and memories danced on the edge of oblivion. And I stood at its heart, a traveler between worlds, poised on the brink of transformation. The woman's form shimmered like smoke caught in a dying flame, her presence both unsettling and strangely comforting. Her voice resonated inside my mind, a melodic harmony that seemed to bypass my ears and speak directly to my soul. To walk this path is to unmake and remake yourself, she said, her words weaving through the air like threads of light. You have come far, shedding memories and crossing thresholds few dare approach. But now, the true choice awaits. I swallowed, the weight of her gaze pressing deep into my bones. What must I surrender? I asked, voice barely above a whisper, fragile as the desert wind. She smiled, a motion both tender and distant. That which binds you most fiercely, the regrets, the fears, the pieces of your past you clutch like lifelines. To move forward, you must release them willingly. Only then can you step beyond the veil. I thought of the phantoms trailing the truck, of the memories clawing at my mind, the tethered regrets whispering in the dark. But what if I forget who I am? What if I lose myself completely? Her eyes softened, shimmering pools of shadow and light. To lose yourself is to find your true self. Here, identity is fluid, a river that reshapes with every choice. What you release will transform into strength or fade into nothingness. The path demands courage, for not all who enter are reborn whole. The desert around us seemed to pulse with her words, the shimmering dust rising like a living tide. Are you ready to surrender your past and embrace what lies beyond? My heart thundered, the talisman warm against my palm. I realized this moment was not just a crossing, but a reckoning, a confrontation with the self beneath the layers of fear and memory. I am ready, I said, voice steady despite the storm within. The woman nodded, extending a hand woven from light and shadow. Then step forward, traveler. Your journey has only just begun. As I reached out, the realm shifted, the swirling light enveloping me, dissolving the boundaries between what was lost and what could be found. The moment my fingers brushed hers, a rush of sensations cascaded through me, like plunging into icy depths and rising through sunlit currents all at once. The desert realm around us dissolved into shifting fragments of light and shadow, swirling in a dizzying dance that blurred the edges of reality. Visions flooded my mind, memories unspooling in rapid succession. Faces I loved and lost, words I never spoke, moments I wished to forget. Each memory weighed heavy, tethered by regret and longing. Yet beneath the pain, a subtle thread of hope shimmered, a promise that release could lead to renewal. The woman's voice echoed softly, guiding me through the maelstrom. These are your trials, the shards of self that demand reckoning. To pass, you must face them without flinching, embrace the pain and the joy, and choose what to carry forward. A path emerged from the chaos, a narrow bridge of light stretching over an abyss of swirling darkness. On the bridge, figures waited, manifestations of my own doubts, fears, and unresolved past. They whispered temptations to turn back, to cling to what was safe and known. I stepped forward, each footfall a battle against the weight of my own shadows. The air hummed with tension, and the desert winds carried voices of both warning and encouragement. One figure, cloaked in the shape of my younger self, reached out with pleading eyes. "Don't forget me," it murmured. "I am the spark of who you were." Another, a dark silhouette edged with fire, hissed, "Abandon hope. There is only oblivion ahead." I clenched my fists, heart pounding. The talisman in my hand pulsed warmly, a steady beacon in the storm. With each step, I learned to weave strength from surrender, to acknowledge the pain without being consumed. The woman's presence was a steady flame beside me, her silent encouragement a lifeline in the swirling tempest. At the bridge's end, a door of pure light awaited, a threshold to a new beginning, forged from the trials endured. I reached for the handle, feeling the weight of the journey in my bones, ready to step beyond. The door before me shimmered with radiant light, its surface alive with shifting patterns, echoes of past and future, joy and sorrow intertwined. I reached out, fingers trembling, and grasped the handle. A warmth spread from my touch, coursing through every fiber of my being. As I pushed the door open, a gentle breeze whispered through the realm, carrying with it scents of rain on dry earth and the soft murmur of distant streams. Beyond lay a landscape transformed, vivid colors pulsing with life, a sky painted in hues of dawn, and the faint hum of possibility. Stepping through, I felt the weight of the past lift, replaced by a serene clarity. Here, memories were no longer chains but threads woven into the fabric of who I had become. The woman's voice, now a soothing melody, echoed, "This is the place reborn from surrender, where the self is free to grow beyond the shadows of regret." Around me, figures from before smiled, not with sorrow but with peace, ready to follow their own paths. I stood at the beginning of a new journey, a traveler transformed, carrying the strength of acceptance and the promise of renewal. The desert behind me faded into a distant memory, while ahead, the horizon stretched infinite, filled with light and uncharted possibility. The air in the cab thickened with unease, each heartbeat echoing louder than the steady rhythm of the wipers. The bridge's shadow stretched long and cold across the water below, but in the mirror, nothing stirred, no sign of the passenger whose presence pressed heavy like a weight I couldn't see. I swallowed hard, hands gripping the wheel tighter. The silence was thick, unnatural, as if the night itself held its breath. The passenger's word, "drive," lingered in the cabin, a command heavier than any spoken threat. The app's screen glowed faintly, the destination locked beyond the river, deeper into parts of the city I rarely ventured. Every instinct screamed caution, but the stranger's silence filled the space, an unspoken demand I couldn't deny. My eyes darted to the rear view again. A flicker, just a moment, of movement at the edge of the glass. A pale shape, like mist or smoke, curled just beyond the seat. I blinked, and it vanished. The rain intensified, pounding the windshield with urgent rhythm, blurring the world outside into streaks of shadow and light. The city's neon signs flickered through the haze, distorted and ghostly. A chill traced down my spine. The passenger's presence felt both absent and all-consuming, a paradox that twisted my nerves into knots. My breath came shallow, ragged. I fought the urge to pull over, to demand answers, but the silent command held me captive. As we crossed the second bridge, the lights below shimmered on the water's surface, fractured and trembling. The radio hissed, static creeping beneath the faint strains of a distant melody, something haunting and familiar, but warped beyond recognition. I glanced again into the rearview. For a heartbeat, those shadowed eyes met mine, deep pools of endless night, reflecting a darkness I could neither understand nor escape. The passenger whispered again, the word threading through my mind like a cold caress, "drive." And so I drove, deeper into the city's shadows, the rain washing the streets but never cleansing the feeling that I was carrying more than a passenger. I was ferrying a secret, a shadow, a fragment of something waiting just beyond the light. The rain intensified, hammering the roof and hood like a relentless drumbeat, as I pressed the accelerator deeper into the night's wet veins. The city blurred past in streaks of fractured light, neon reds bleeding into rainy blacks, reflections fractured on the slick asphalt. Each drop seemed to echo with secrets. The passenger remained silent, a presence more felt than seen, his shadow folding into the darkness of the back seat. The air around him felt colder, as if he carried winter's chill trapped beneath that sodden coat. Ahead, the river loomed, a vast black ribbon cutting through the city's heart. The bridge stretched before me like a gateway, wet and gleaming under the streetlights, each step of its span an echo of forgotten journeys. As I crossed, the radio's static thickened, words warping into eerie fragments that teased at memory and meaning. The haunting melody twisted into a distorted lullaby, a sound that seemed to pull at something deep inside me, ancient and aching. Suddenly, the rearview mirror rippled, as if the glass itself breathed. The passenger's pale face emerged from shadow, eyes voids of endless night, staring into mine with a gaze that pierced through flesh and bone. A whisper brushed my ear, barely audible yet impossible to ignore, "Drive until the city forgets you." My hands clenched the wheel, breath catching in my throat. The streets behind us twisted and lengthened, the cityscape folding into a labyrinth of shadows and forgotten alleys. The river below whispered secrets, carrying away all that was left behind. And in that endless night, I realized I was no longer just a driver. I was a vessel, carrying stories, shadows, and souls bound by silence and rain. The city seemed to stretch and warp around me, streets folding back upon themselves like the pages of an ancient, worn book. Neon lights flickered erratically, casting fractured shadows that danced at the edges of my vision. The rain continued its relentless descent, each drop a tiny percussion on the roof, yet beneath the surface, an eerie stillness reigned. The passenger's presence thickened the air, an almost tangible weight pressing against my chest. His eyes, vast voids of darkness, never left mine through the rearview mirror. I could feel the pull, like gravity reversed, drawing me deeper into the city's forgotten veins. "Drive," he whispered again, voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "Until there's nothing left but silence." I obeyed, heart pounding, hands gripping the wheel as the world outside dissolved into a blur of wet concrete and flickering signs. The GPS faltered, the app spinning endlessly with no clear destination, only the endless road ahead. We passed through neighborhoods where the streetlights dimmed, where buildings sagged like weary sentinels, their windows shattered or blackened. Somewhere, a child's laughter echoed, distant and hollow, fading quickly into the storm. The river beside us murmured secrets, its dark water swallowing reflections and memories alike. The bridge behind vanished into mist, leaving only the night's heavy breath. Suddenly, the car shuddered, the engine stuttering as if resisting the journey. The tachograph flickered, digits counting down in a language I no longer understood. The passenger's gaze bore into me, silent command etched deep into shadowed eyes. The radio crackled, then burst into a chorus of fragmented voices, overlapping and swirling, names and places lost to time whispered on the wind. The lullaby returned, slow and inverted, wrapping around my mind like a spectral embrace. I realized then the journey was no longer just through the city, but through the layers of forgotten lives, where stories tangled and unraveled like threads in a cosmic tapestry. The passenger spoke one last time, voice fading into the storm, "This is the road where the forgotten find their way home." As the rain softened into a gentle drizzle, the city's edges blurred into dawn's first light. The car slowed, and before me, a gate loomed, ancient ironwork entwined with vines that glowed faintly in the soft morning. I knew this was the end of the road, a place between worlds, where the lost were given rest, and the journey's purpose revealed. The car slowed as the gate emerged from the mist, an ancient archway wrought from black iron, twisted with curling vines that pulsed faintly with an otherworldly glow. The rain had eased to a gentle drizzle, each drop catching the pale light like shattered glass. I swallowed the knot in my throat, heart hammering in my chest. The passenger's shadowed form shifted beside me, still silent, still watching. As we rolled beneath the arch, a hush fell over the world. The city behind dissolved into nothingness, swallowed by fog and silence. Beyond the gate lay a courtyard bathed in ethereal light, not sunlight, but something softer, more alive. Figures stood scattered among marble pillars and ancient trees, their faces blurred but unmistakably human. They turned as one, eyes meeting mine with a mixture of relief, sorrow, and welcome. The passenger spoke at last, voice low and reverent. "These are the lost, the forgotten souls gathered between worlds. Each one a story unfinished, a memory seeking peace." The gate began to close slowly behind us, vines tightening as if sealing away the past. A figure stepped forward, a woman whose face was both familiar and impossibly distant. Her eyes held the depth of countless nights, her presence a calm that cut through the lingering storm. She reached out, touching my forehead gently. In that touch, memories flooded back, love and loss, fear and courage, all woven into the tapestry of my journey. "You have crossed the threshold," she said. "Here, the forgotten find rest, and the living are given the chance to heal." Around us, the gathered souls began to shimmer, their forms solidifying into warmth and light. I realized then that this was not an end but a beginning, a place where stories intertwined, where past and future danced in fragile harmony. The passenger faded into the light, a silent guardian released from his burden. And as dawn broke fully over this realm between worlds, I stepped forward, ready to write the next chapter of my own story. The realm between worlds stretched vast and timeless, a place where reality's edges blurred and the fabric of existence wove together threads of memory, hope, and shadow. Here, time did not flow as it did in the living world, moments folded back upon themselves, and past, present, and future coexisted in a delicate, shimmering dance. Marble pillars rose like ancient sentinels, their surfaces etched with glyphs that pulsed faintly with soft blue light, symbols older than language, holding secrets of creation and passage. The trees bore leaves that glowed with ethereal luminescence, their branches whispering in a tongue felt more than heard. Shadows moved beneath their boughs, neither threatening nor comforting, but a reminder of the fine line this place walked between light and dark. The souls gathered here were fragments of lives interrupted, echoes seeking resolution. Some bore the weariness of ages, their faces etched with sorrow and longing, others shimmered with the fresh ache of recent loss, raw and trembling. They mingled, shared stories without words, their essences weaving into the ambient light like threads in a vast tapestry. The woman who had greeted me was known here as the keeper of stories, guardian and guide to those who arrived. Her role was to help souls untangle the knots of regret, to find the threads of forgiveness and understanding that would allow passage onward or, for some, a return transformed. She led me through the courtyard, where pools of still water mirrored infinite skies, reflections not of the world above, but of inner landscapes. Gazing into one, I saw fragments of my own life, choices made and unmade, paths taken and forsaken. The images shifted, inviting me to confront them not with fear, but with compassion. Here, she explained, the veil between self and other thins. Healing begins when we acknowledge the fullness of our stories, the light and the shadow intertwined. Only then can the soul move freely, unbound by the chains of memory. As I walked, whispers of ancient knowledge brushed my mind, secrets of the universe woven into the very stones, the air, the shimmering light. This was a place of transformation, where the essence of being was distilled and refined. Yet beneath the beauty lay a profound truth: not all who arrived found peace easily. Some clung desperately to pain, weaving it into their identity, fearful to let go. The keeper's task was both gentle and relentless, to guide without forcing, to hold space for the journey's unfolding. I felt the weight of my own burdens, the shadows I carried still lingering at the edges of my awareness. But here, in this sacred between world, I sensed the possibility of release, a chance to rewrite the narrative, to heal the fractures. The mysteries of this realm were many, a labyrinth of light and shadow, memory and hope. And as I stood beneath the glowing trees, I understood that the journey was not just about crossing thresholds, but embracing the fullness of existence itself. Beneath the soft glow of the luminescent trees and amidst the whispered secrets of the Keeper's realm, I soon realized that peace was not simply bestowed, it was earned. The Between Worlds was a crucible, a place where the soul was tested, stretched, and forged anew. Here, the challenges were not external battles but deeply personal trials, reflections of the wounds, fears, and regrets carried from life. One of the first challenges was the trial of shadows, a confrontation with the parts of oneself long buried in darkness. The shadows took shape as figures from my past, faceless at first, then slowly revealing the faces of those I'd hurt or lost. They spoke without words, their presence heavy with unspoken accusations and sorrow. To pass, I had to face them not with defensiveness, but with acceptance, allowing forgiveness, both given and received, to unravel the tangled threads of guilt and pain. Next came the labyrinth of memories, a twisting maze of my own recollections. Paths forked endlessly, some leading to moments of joy, others to heartbreak and regret. The maze shifted with every step, challenging me to navigate the complexities of my life's narrative. At times, the corridors narrowed, forcing me to confront painful truths, other times, they opened into expansive vistas of hope and possibility. The lesson was clear: to move forward, one must integrate all parts of their story, embracing the full spectrum of experience. At the heart of the realm stood the Mirror of Truth, an ancient artifact that reflected not the physical form but the soul's true nature. Gazing into it, I saw not only my strengths and light but also the fractures and fears hidden beneath the surface. The mirror's reflection shifted and morphed, challenging me to acknowledge uncomfortable truths without shame. It demanded honesty and courage, a willingness to be vulnerable in order to heal. Throughout the journey, the weight of regret pressed down like a tangible force. Moments I wished to forget resurfaced, heavy as stones chained to my spirit. The realm tested my resilience, whether I would let regret crush me or use its lessons to build new foundations. The Keeper's presence was vital here, a steady hand guiding me through the tempest of emotions. Finally, the ultimate challenge was the choice of passage. After navigating the trials, I stood before two paths, one leading onward toward light and renewal, the other offering the chance to return, forever changed but still tethered to the mortal world. The decision was mine alone, a testament to the soul's freedom and the courage to embrace the unknown. Each challenge was a mirror, a reflection of the inner journey required to transcend pain and fear. The Between Worlds was not merely a resting place but a forge of transformation, where the lost found meaning, and the broken became whole. The slight forward lean of the car pressed into my chest, subtle but undeniable. An unseen weight settled onto the passenger seat cushion beside me. A breath, not mine, brushed the back of my neck, cool and damp like river fog rolling in from distant shores. Across the water, sodium lamps stitched the boulevard into fractured lines of yellow light, piercing the night's dark fabric. I risked another glance in the rearview mirror. There he was. Head tilted ever so slightly, rainwater trailing from the edge of his hood like threads of molten mercury. My scalp prickled with unease. I told myself the earlier absence was just poor angle, a trick of the glass, maybe glare. But the copper tang in my mouth betrayed my fear. The city thinned rapidly behind us. Storefronts dissolved into empty warehouses, warehouses gave way to derelict lots tangled with ragged weeds. The GPS's glow remained steady, but the route line jittered as though the very road beneath us convulsed with a life of its own. A gray bar slid across the screen. Cell towers must have fallen in the storm. I asked him softly if he still needed the listed address or preferred an alternate destination. His rasping reply was a single word: east. The only road east was the old highway, a cracked ribbon of asphalt seldom patrolled, whispered about and avoided. Tires hissed on wet pavement as I merged. The speedometer read 60, but every mile felt stolen, borrowed from something else. Lightning flickered overhead, exposing skeletal billboards ragged as flayed skin. My knuckles whitened as I gripped the wheel tighter. Pulse hammering in my ears, breath hitching at the top of every inhale. Cold sweat gathered beneath my arms despite the chilled air. We crossed a narrow bridge with broken guardrails, and for a heartbeat, the back seat was empty again. The car felt impossibly light, as if some weight had lifted from its frame. My stomach flipped. Headlights wavered dangerously when I jerked the wheel. A whisper, moist, chilling, brushed my ear, "Keep going." I twisted, searching, but the darkness swallowed where a person should have been. I forced my gaze forward just in time to pull from the verge. Mile markers thinned and vanished altogether. Trees crept closer, their branches meshing overhead into a suffocating tunnel. Each lightning flash revealed the woods shifting, redrawn by some drunken hand. The car's cabin shrank, the engine's hum vibrating through the pedals like a caged animal ready to leap. Anxiety clawed at me, a silent scream to flee. Then the dashboard dinged. My mouth dried. Distance to empty, 333 km/h. Negative fuel range. An impossible number. A digital omen etched in glowing glyphs. I eased off the gas. The engine hiccuped, threatening to stall. I feathered the accelerator, fingers drumming a frantic rhythm. Ahead, the road opened into a massive interchange, a cloverleaf abandoned decades ago, overgrown with weeds and shadowed by decay. Rusted signs hung skewed, their letters mottled with mold. Dead streetlights left only my headlights cutting pale circles through concrete walls smeared with mineral ghosts. The passenger whispered at last, voice serrated and low, "Here I break." The engine shuddered and died, folding the cabin into absolute blackness. Window glass misted with my hot breath. I twisted the key. The starter clicked. Silence. A tingle crept from spine to fingertips, adrenal glands firing acid into my blood. Instinct screamed, "Stop, and become prey." I jabbed the ignition again. The engine roared, reluctant but alive. The dashboard still bled numbers, 333 Clawway. I slammed the shifter into drive, racing onto the inner loop. Concrete walls funneled my headlights forward, road reflectors pulsed past like cardiac monitors. I counted ramp merges, 1, 2, 3, expecting the highway's embrace. After the fourth spiral, the world turned back to the same graffiti-scarred retaining wall I'd passed moments before. My throat clenched tight. Sweat soaked my lower back. Panic whispered to scream, to fight, but I bit my cheek until iron flooded my mouth. Slow breaths, in 2, 3. Out 2, 3. The passenger sat silent, an enigma folded into shadow and mist. His presence was less of flesh and more of an echo, a fragment of something lost between worlds. The rain clung to his coat like spectral water, refusing to soak in, as if he existed on the edge of reality, tethered only loosely to the here and now. His eyes, those endless voids, held no warmth, yet they shimmered with a knowing sorrow, as if he carried the weight of forgotten memories too heavy for any living soul. I sensed he was both guide and warden, a keeper of thresholds, tasked with escorting those caught between past and present, life and oblivion. The Clawway, that name flickering ominously on the dashboard, was no ordinary stretch of road. It was a liminal passage, a trap laid between worlds, twisting back on itself to ensnare travelers who dared to tread its haunted curves. A place where time and space folded like cruel origami, and where the ghosts of those who lost their way clung to the edges like shadows desperate for release. This loop was said to be carved by ancient forces, remnants of curses, forgotten rituals, or perhaps the collective despair of countless lost souls. Drivers caught within its coils found themselves trapped in endless spirals, forced to confront fragments of their own pasts reflected in the ghosts trailing behind them. The passenger was more than a companion, he was part of the Clawway itself, a spectral guardian ensuring the cycle remained unbroken. His whisper, "Here I break," was a chilling reminder that even he, bound to this place, might one day shatter, releasing what he guarded into the world beyond. I realized then that my journey was not simply physical but metaphysical, a test of will and memory, played out on a road that defied the laws of nature and sanity. The Clawway was both prison and purgatory, and the passenger its eternal sentinel. The weight of his presence pressed on me, heavy and unyielding. I could feel it in the way the air shifted, thickening with each passing moment, as if the very fabric of reality was bending around us. The passenger's pale eyes, those endless voids, bore into mine through the rearview mirror, not with malice, but with a sorrow so profound it seemed to seep into my bones. "Why are you here?" I whispered, voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. He didn't answer with words, but a memory unfurled in my mind, an image of a man trapped on this same road decades ago, forever circling the clawway, his life slipping through his fingers like grains of sand. He was neither alive nor dead, caught between worlds, a ghost condemned to guide others down the same spiraling path. The passenger was that man. Bound to the clawway by some ancient curse or cosmic debt, a warden of lost souls who had become both prisoner and jailer. His duty was eternal, to ensure the clawway's cycle never broke, to ferry the living toward the choices that would decide their fate. As the truck circled once more, the walls closing in tighter, I felt a sudden surge of resolve. This was not a place to surrender but to fight. The passenger's presence, though overwhelming, was not invincible. I reached slowly into the pocket beside me, fingers closing around the small talisman I'd found earlier, a token that pulsed faintly with otherworldly light. Its warmth spread through my hand, a fragile beacon of hope. "Your path is not mine to choose," I said firmly, eyes locked on his reflection. "I will break this cycle." The passenger's gaze flickered, a hint of surprise or perhaps respect crossing his spectral features. The tachograph's numbers flickered wildly, nearing that ominous triple-digit mark. Ahead, the retaining wall loomed again, graffiti twisted and warped, but something had changed. The road beneath us shimmered, a thin line of light carving a new path forward. The clawway was shifting. I gripped the wheel tighter, breath steady, heart racing. This was my chance. The moment I spotted the shimmering thread of light carving a new path ahead, adrenaline surged like wildfire through my veins. The retaining wall, the relentless loop's cruel boundary, began to dissolve, revealing a narrow passage cutting through the darkness. It beckoned, fragile and uncertain, but undeniable. I stole a glance at the passenger's reflection. His pale eyes narrowed, the eternal sorrow flickering with something darker, perhaps anger, or a begrudging respect. With every ounce of will, I pressed the accelerator forward. The truck surged, tires gripping the cracked asphalt as the loop's familiar walls faded behind me. The concrete barriers twisted into wisps of smoke, and the graffiti-stained surfaces dissolved into the night air. The tachograph counted down faster, numbers flashing in a dizzying cascade. The claws of the clawway seemed to claw at the very edges of reality, desperate to reclaim its captive. The spectral passenger whispered again, voice edged with a warning. "The cycle breaks only at a price." I didn't answer. My focus was absolute, eyes fixed on the narrowing beam of light ahead, the thin ribbon of freedom unraveling before me. Suddenly, the truck jolted violently as an unseen force gripped the chassis. The steering wheel vibrated in my hands, and the engine roared in defiance. The road beneath twisted unpredictably, shadows flickering like restless phantoms. But I held firm, heart pounding in sync with the tachograph's frantic rhythm. The spectral presence beside me began to waver, form flickering like a dying ember. His voice faded to a whisper of wind, "Remember this moment, the choice you made, it echoes beyond the clawway." Then, silence. The world snapped into focus, the endless loop behind me shattered like glass, replaced by a quiet stretch of road leading into a dawn tinged with soft gold. I exhaled, muscles trembling but free. The passenger was gone. Only the faint pulse of the talisman remained in my pocket, a reminder of the journey and the thin line between captivity and freedom. The dawn was pale and tentative, brushing soft strokes of light across the horizon as I rolled onto the open road beyond the clawway's shattered grasp. The air tasted different, cleaner, lighter, as if the heavy weight that had clung to my chest for so long had finally lifted. Yet beneath the relief, a quiet unease stirred, reminding me that freedom was not the end but the beginning. The passenger's absence left an echoing silence in the cab, a hollow space where his spectral presence had once lingered. I glanced at the empty back seat, half expecting the shadow to flicker back, but only the morning light filled the space. The talisman in my pocket pulsed faintly, a steady heartbeat against my skin, a reminder of the journey endured and the price paid. Memories rushed forward, not as burdens now, but as threads woven into the tapestry of who I was becoming. The shadows trailing behind, the endless loops, the whispered warnings, all part of a story rewritten through courage and choice. I knew the road ahead would be uncertain, filled with unknowns and challenges yet to come. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I embraced the horizon with open eyes and steady breath. The city's edge appeared ahead, alive with morning bustle and light. Yet beneath its surface, I sensed the hidden layers, the fragile thresholds between worlds still waiting, still watching. I started the engine anew, ready to face whatever path awaited, carrying with me the lessons of the clawway, the strength of the talisman, and the unbroken will to keep moving forward. The journey was far from over, but this time, I was no longer lost. The heavy air inside the cabin thickened, wrapping around me like a wet shroud. My mind grasped at the fading strands of forgotten mindfulness, the slow, steady breath that once steadied storms inside. But the world outside had shifted, morphed into a silent labyrinth where rain no longer whispered, where time fractured beneath concrete canopies. The overhead fabric sagged as if soaked with invisible moisture, drooping low over the dimming light. A stagnant, earthy smell seeped from the vents, thick like a pond left to rot. The familiar patter of rain on the roof had vanished, swallowed by this unnatural silence. My breath hitched as a soft, sinister sound slid into the space, a wet rustling, the subtle brush of fabric near my ear. Peripheral vision caught a movement, darkness within darkness, shifting almost imperceptibly in the rearview mirror. I refused to meet it directly, keeping my gaze locked on the endless tunnel ahead. Yet out of the corner of my eye, pale fingers, long and reed-thin, traced slowly over the headrest behind me, as if testing the limits of my reaction. A surge of panic pressed at my chest. My hand twitched toward the door handle, fantasizing about hurt, bruises, escape. But the steering wheel locked tight beneath my palms. The car accelerated without my consent, the RPM climbed. Concrete tunnels blurred past like a nightmare carousel. My breathing shattered into ragged shards. Then came the voice, not loud, not soft, but lodged deep beside my auditory canal. It throbbed, a bass vibration beneath my skin, a relentless pulse that rattled my nerves. Another ramp loomed, another loop completed, another wall of déjà vu slammed into me. My eyes burned, tears breaking free, not from grief, but from the body's revolt against impossible geometry. I flicked on the cabin light, a feeble plea for reality, and for a fraction of a second, the bulb flared weakly, then exploded with a sharp pop. Glass shards clung to the socket as if fused by some dark flame. But in that brief strobe, I saw him fully. He was there. The coat dripped, though we'd left the rain behind. Limbs stretched unnaturally long, joints bending in impossible hinges. His chin rested on the passenger seat's top, spine unervingly absent of vertebrae. His face blurred, an obscured photograph protecting identity, but I felt his gaze pierce straight through the back of my skull. Then the light died. Blackness thicker than night pressed down, suffocating. My heartbeat staggered. Peripheral phosphenes flickered as if my senses were unraveling. He did nothing but insist I continue. The loop obeyed him. The car obeyed the loop. I was the variable meant to crack. Why the negative range? A message? Distance traveled beyond zero? Less than void? I whispered, voice raw and foreign to myself, I don't understand. What do you want? His reply seeped through upholstery, engine vibration, sternum, remember. A memory stabbed sharp and cold. Years ago, I had parked beneath this very cloverleaf during a delivery shift. Engine off, seat reclined, eyes closed against dawn. Half asleep, half dreaming, I sensed something climbing from the shadows of the interchange, watching me through the windshield. Too terrified to investigate, I'd fled. Later, I buried that residue of dread beneath laughter and sarcasm. Now the interchange had gestated that fear into form. The passenger was its embodiment, an unpaid toll. I swallowed hard, throat raw, and whispered an apology into the darkness, for intruding, for ignoring, for failing to acknowledge. Heat flamed my cheeks though the cabin remained icy. My fingers loosened. For the first time since the loop began, I lifted my foot off the pedal. The engine hummed on momentum, softening to idle. I guided the truck slowly to the shoulder, rolling to a stop beside a crumbling Jersey barrier. Silence layered over silence. The dashboard glowed faintly, 300 through 3 km. Its glare no longer accused, merely stated fact. I waited for the stall, the refusal, the collapse. But the car idled steady. A thread of calm wove through the madness. The cabin settled into an uneasy stillness, the engine's steady hum a fragile heartbeat amid the vast silence. Outside, the cracked concrete of the abandoned cloverleaf stretched endlessly, shadows pooling like spilled ink beneath flickering, broken streetlights. The rain had ceased, leaving the world slick and gleaming, a mirror to the fractured night. I exhaled slowly, tasting the cold air that mingled with the faint, lingering scent of stagnant pond. My hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, fingers tracing the worn leather as if anchoring myself to what was real. The ghostly presence in the seat beside me no longer pressed against my nerves, but lingered, a quiet sentinel in the half-light. For a moment, the loop's relentless pressure lifted. The tachograph's glowing digits steadied, no longer counting down but holding a steady rhythm, like a pulse finding its balance. Yet beneath the surface of this fragile calm, something deeper stirred. The loop was not simply a prison of asphalt and memory, it was a crucible for reckoning. A place where the soul's debts were tallied, where fears and regrets were weighed against the will to move forward. The passenger, more than a ghost, less than flesh, was both judge and guide, reflecting the parts of me I had refused to face. His presence was a mirror to my own shadows, a reminder that escape required not just flight but confrontation. I glanced once more at the rearview mirror. The darkness beyond the glass seemed less oppressive now, the edges softened as if something unseen had shifted. The road ahead was uncertain, a thread stretched taut between hope and despair. In this pause, I realized the reckoning was not over. The loop had loosened its grip, but the journey within had only begun. I needed to look deeper, not away from the shadows but into them. To understand the debts owed, the memories chained tight, and the courage to face what waited in the folds of forgotten fear. The night held its breath, waiting for the next step. And I, trembling but resolute, prepared to take it. The loft seemed to breathe with the fading note, the silence heavy and pregnant with anticipation. The single bulb flickered once more, casting dancing shadows that wavered like spirits disturbed. My fingers trembled slightly, still poised above the strings, the familiar warmth of the guitar now cold and distant beneath the haunting melody that had slipped through the walls. The air grew thick, charged with an invisible presence. The metallic tang of anxiety sharpened, mingling with the musty scent of old wood and worn cables. The quiet hum of the amp pulsed beneath the surface, as if sinking to an otherworldly rhythm. I strained to listen, heart hammering not from nerves alone but from something deeper, an ancient call woven into the fabric of sound itself. The melody returned, softer this time, threading through the bricks like a whispered secret, bending and weaving notes no mortal fingers could play. My breath hitched. There was no rational explanation, no hidden speakers, no recordings left behind. Just the impossible music, drawn slow and deliberate, testing the boundaries of my reality. A chill traced my spine, and instinct screamed at me to flee. Yet curiosity rooted me in place, fingers finally settling on the fretboard, ready to answer the silent call. The bulb above flickered violently, then steadied as the melody slipped into a haunting refrain, echoing from wall to wall, drawing me deeper into a song that was not mine, yet intimately familiar. The melody lingered in the shadows long after the last note faded, leaving an eerie stillness that pressed against my senses like a weight. The loft, Once a sanctuary for creation, now felt transformed, an unfamiliar stage set for a story I had yet to understand. I rose slowly, every creak of the floorboards echoing louder than usual in the heavy silence. The exposed brick walls, so familiar and comforting, seemed to close in, their rough surfaces mottled with dark stains I had never noticed before. The single bulb above flickered erratically, casting restless shadows that shifted like phantoms at the edge of vision. My gaze settled on the guitar, its polished wood gleaming under the wavering light. Something was wrong, an imperceptible displacement, as if the instrument itself held a secret it wasn't ready to reveal. I reached out, fingers brushing the strings, and a cold shiver ran through me as the notes resonated not with the familiar warmth of my playing but with a hollow, spectral echo. A sudden draft stirred the room, though windows were closed tight. Papers fluttered on a nearby table, and the faintest scent of damp earth seeped from the cracks in the floorboards. I scanned the loft, searching for the source, but found nothing, only the thickening darkness pooling in the corners. Then, in the corner of my eye, I caught movement, a flicker of a shadow darting behind the amplifier. I spun around, heart racing, but the space was empty. The faint sound of whispering brushed past my ears, indistinct and fragmented, like voices carried on the wind from a distant storm. My breath hitched. The loft was no longer just a room, it had become a threshold, a conduit between the known and the unknown. Something had crossed the line, lingering in the spaces between walls and sounds. I knew then that the melody was a summons, the first note in a haunting song that would unravel the mysteries long buried within this space. The notes shimmering on the vellum beckoned, pulling me closer as if the music itself was a thread tying me to some deeper truth. My fingers trembled, brushing the fragile surface, and the glow intensified, spilling warmth into the cold shadows. As the melody unfolded, the mirror began to ripple again, its water-like surface fracturing into scenes, memories long buried beneath the years. Faces emerged, a woman with sorrowful eyes, a child laughing beneath rain-soaked skies, a faded photograph burned at the edges. Each image flickered briefly, a fragment of a story half remembered. The silent orchestra swelled, the instruments vibrating in unison, drawing a haunting harmony from the void. It was a song of loss and longing, of voices silenced but not forgotten. Suddenly, a hand, pale and ghostly, pressed against the other side of the mirror, fingertips tracing shapes only I could see. A whisper followed, barely audible yet deeply familiar, "Remember me." My breath caught. The mirror was no longer a mere reflection but a veil, thin and permeable, between the present and a past aching to be reclaimed. I stepped forward, hand reaching out to meet the apparition, to bridge the divide. The room held its breath, poised on the edge of revelation. And in that fragile moment, the haunting melody promised to unveil the stories trapped behind glass, waiting for their voice to rise once more. The moment my fingertips brushed the cold, trembling surface of the mirror, a shiver raced through my body, as if the fragile barrier between two worlds had thinned to a mere breath. The ghostly hand met mine on the other side, translucent yet pulsing with a faint warmth, a paradox of presence and absence. The whisper echoed again, more urgent this time, threading itself into my mind, "Remember me." Visions cascaded in blinding bursts, fragments of a past I had buried deep beneath layers of denial and time. A face blurred by tears, a lullaby sung beneath fading stars, promises broken and love left unspoken. The melody that had haunted the room was not just a song, but a plea, a call to unearth forgotten truths and to mend what had long been fractured. The orchestra swelled with unseen energy, notes spiraling upward, binding the broken threads of memory and hope. The instruments, though silent to others, sang clearly to my soul, their harmonies weaving a tapestry of loss and redemption. I stepped through the veil, crossing the threshold where reflection becomes reality, where the past entwines with the present. The room shifted, colors deepening, shadows retreating into soft light. Before me stood a figure, familiar and yet transformed, her eyes shimmering with the weight of unspoken stories. She reached out, and as our hands met, the final notes of the melody blossomed into a crescendo, a song of reunion, healing, and the eternal dance between what was lost and what is found. The figure's gaze held a quiet sorrow that softened as our hands met, flesh against spirit, warmth against the chill of memory. The air around us shimmered, alive with the fading echoes of that haunting melody now transformed into a song of fragile hope. Time seemed to stretch and fold, holding us suspended between moments lost and moments reclaimed. Her voice, when it came, was a fragile thread woven from years of silence and longing. "You carried me with you," she whispered, "even when you didn't know." I felt the weight of unspoken apologies and unseen tears settle between us, a bridge spanning the chasm that had kept us apart. The room around us brightened, shadows retreating as the music wrapped us in its tender embrace. The instruments lining the walls began to glow softly, their silent voices joining the chorus, a symphony of healing and forgiveness. But amid the warmth, I sensed the journey was far from over. The veil between worlds was thin and fragile, and shadows still lingered at its edges, waiting for the courage to face them. Together, we stepped forward, ready to unravel the remaining mysteries, to confront the pain that still clung like a stubborn refrain. For in this space, between loss and reunion, true healing begins. Their hands intertwined, a fragile tether spanning the gulf of years and silence. As we stepped deeper into the light that now suffused the room, memories began to stir, whispers of forgotten promises, laughter muffled by time, and sorrows that had carved themselves into the very walls. She spoke softly, each word a thread unraveling the tapestry of their shared past. Stories emerged, moments of joy, fractures born of absence, and a secret kept beneath layers of pain. The melody that had haunted the loft was their bond, a song born from love and loss, waiting to be completed. But healing was no gentle tide. Shadows lingered, unspoken fears and regrets that threatened to pull them apart once more. They faced visions conjured by the music, echoes of mistakes, of wounds too raw to forget, and choices yet to be made. Each trial demanded courage, to forgive, to let go, to embrace the unknown future together. The instruments around them pulsed with the intensity of their emotions, the silent orchestra swelling as if urging them forward. In the heart of the rotunda, beneath the tarnished mirror, they found not just reflection but reckoning. The past and present entwined in a delicate dance, inviting them to step beyond pain into renewal. Their journey was far from over. The path ahead wound through shadows and light alike, but together, they held the strength to navigate it. And as the final notes of their shared melody rose, the loft transformed, from a place haunted by silence into a sanctuary of rebirth. The instruments lining the walls, once mute and fractured, began to shimmer with a newfound vitality. Their broken strings vibrated softly, weaving together an ethereal symphony that seemed to pulse with the very heartbeat of the loft. Each note carried the weight of memory, sorrow, and hope, an ancient language spoken without words. The mirror before them no longer reflected mere images but revealed deeper truths, fractured reflections of past selves, potential futures, and the intertwining threads of fate. It was a gateway, a threshold where time and space dissolved, allowing the past and present to merge. As the music swelled, the room seemed to breathe, the shadows retreating and the light growing warmer. The woman and I stood together, feeling the resonance of the instruments echo within us, binding us to the stories etched into the walls and the souls that had once called this place home. The mirror's surface rippled, revealing scenes of the loft's forgotten history, artists who had poured their passions here, joys that had blossomed and withered, secrets buried beneath layers of dust and silence. It was a tapestry of lives intertwined, each thread vibrant and vital despite the passage of time. In this moment, the loft was no longer just a space of haunted echoes but a living monument to transformation and healing. The broken instruments, the tarnished mirror, and the lingering melody were symbols of resilience, reminders that even in fragments, beauty and meaning endure. Together, we stepped forward, ready to embrace the future woven from the remnants of the past. The music played on, a testament to the power of memory, love, and the unending dance between shadow and light. The neon sign above the diner crackled in the wind-whipped dusk, sputtering violet flashes across a cracked parking lot that reeked of hot dust and stale gasoline. I killed the ignition and sat still, letting the silence settle like a weight around me. The hum of distant traffic faded into the background, replaced by the faint whistle of the desert breeze weaving through rusted metal and broken glass. The diner itself was a relic, paint peeling, windows smeared with years of grime, and the flickering sign its only stubborn claim to life. As I stepped out, the heat clung to my skin, mingling with the scent of burnt coffee and charred grease. The wooden porch creaked underfoot, groaning a tired welcome. Inside, the air was thick with memories. The clatter of cups and muted conversations seemed ghosts of a bygone era, echoes trapped beneath layers of peeling wallpaper and cracked linoleum. The few patrons glanced up, their eyes wary, shadows lingering beneath tired smiles. I took a seat at the worn counter, the vinyl stool squeaking as I settled in. The waitress, a woman with lines etched deep from years of hard living, nodded a quiet greeting, sliding a chipped mug of black coffee my way. As I lifted the mug, a sudden chill brushed my neck, an echo of a presence, unseen yet palpable. The neon sign outside flickered erratically, casting the room in pulses of violet and shadow. A soft murmur rippled through the diner, barely audible but insistent, like a song half remembered. My heart quickened. Something was waiting. The murmur in the diner grew, a delicate susurration threading through the clatter of coffee cups and low murmurs of tired patrons. It was a voice, or perhaps a chorus of voices, carrying fragments of forgotten stories, whispers folded into the air like smoke. I felt it before I heard it, a presence not bound by flesh or time. It lingered in the corners, flickering like the neon sign outside, an echo from a past that refused to fade. The waitress moved with a practiced calm, but her eyes held shadows deeper than the night. As she poured another cup, her gaze met mine, a flicker of recognition, or was it warning, before she turned away, her footsteps soft on the worn floor. A man at the end of the counter spoke in a voice low and gravelly, his words weaving a tale half forgotten, of a traveler who vanished near the outskirts, swallowed by desert shadows, of secrets buried beneath cracked asphalt, of a presence that watched and waited, patient and unyielding. The diner seemed to pulse with this story, the walls absorbing the weight of unspoken truths. Outside, the violet neon blinked, once, twice, then steady, bathing the parking lot in a steady, haunting glow. I realized then that the presence was not merely a ghost but a sentinel, a keeper of stories lost and memories that refused to rest. As night deepened, the diner became a crossroads between what was and what lingered, a thin veil where the living brushed against the shadows of the forgotten. And I, a stranger drawn to its pulse, was caught in its quiet orbit, feeling the weight of stories waiting to unfold. The gravelly voice faded, leaving a thick silence that wrapped around me like a shroud. The flickering neon cast long, wavering shadows that danced with the rhythm of my own quickening pulse. I felt the weight of unseen eyes, watchful, patient, waiting. I glanced toward the diner's far corner, where a weathered jukebox hummed softly, its lights dimmed but pulsing with a faint, ghostly glow. The music it played wasn't from any era I recognized, an eerie, looping melody woven from fragments of forgotten songs, a lullaby sung by voices long silenced. Curiosity pulled me closer. As I approached, the air thickened, charged with a strange energy that prickled my skin and made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The jukebox's glow brightened, casting ethereal patterns across cracked linoleum and peeling wallpaper. Suddenly, the room seemed to shift. The chatter of the patrons faded into distant echoes. The flickering bulbs dimmed until the only light came from the pulsating jukebox. Its melody swelled, carrying with it whispers, snatches of conversation, laughter, tears, from times and lives intertwined with this place. I felt myself slipping beyond the diner's walls, drawn into a tapestry of memories that bled through time. Faces materialized, strangers and friends, lovers and loners, all bound by the unseen presence that haunted this crossroads. Among them, the traveler's figure emerged, a silhouette etched in longing and loss. His eyes, deep wells of sorrow, met mine. In that gaze, I glimpsed the story, a man caught between worlds, tethered by regrets and unanswered questions, searching for release. The jukebox's song reached a haunting crescendo, and the diner's walls seemed to pulse in time with the music, breathing life into the lingering shadows. I realized then that the mysterious presence was not just a watcher but a bridge, a conduit between the living and the lost, between past and present. And as the final notes faded, I knew my own story had become entwined with theirs, pulled into the quiet mystery waiting just beyond the neon light. The kitchen doorway yawned open, darkness pooling beyond like an invitation or a trap. The scent shifted, less syrup and burnt coffee, more something ancient and acrid, like smoldering wood and dried herbs long forgotten. My footsteps echoed on cracked linoleum, swallowed by the heavy silence that hung thick between peeling walls. Dim light filtered through grimy windows, casting long shadows that writhed and stretched unnaturally. Pots and pans hung from hooks, gleaming faintly despite the dust. The air was colder here, pressing against my skin like a silent weight. Ahead, a narrow corridor disappeared into gloom. I moved cautiously, senses sharpening. A faint hum, low and vibrating, resonated from deep within, mingling with the distant drip of water somewhere unseen. I paused before an old wooden door, its surface scarred and swollen with age. My fingers brushed the rough grain. The owner's voice echoed behind me, distant but certain. You seek the recipe, but recipes are debts written in flavor and memory. A shiver traced down my spine. The door creaked open on its own, revealing a room bathed in dim amber light. Shelves lined with dusty jars and dried herbs curved like arcane relics. In the center, an ancient wooden table bore a single, worn cookbook, its pages yellowed and brittle. As I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me, plunging the kitchen corridor into darkness. The hum deepened, becoming a chant, a language I felt but could not understand. Shadows flickered at the edges of vision, shapes coalescing just beyond sight. The recipe I sought was no simple list of ingredients, it was a ritual, a binding of memory, flavor, and sacrifice. To know it was to pay a price. And as the chant rose, I realized the diner's special was not merely food, it was a gateway, a contract, a reckoning. The weight in my chest lifted slightly, as though a shutter had opened inside my mind, letting in a sliver of light amid the shadows. Names and faces once blurred began to crystallize, moments I'd buried beneath years of noise and neglect. The scent of birthday candles, the scratch of chalk on a blackboard, the warmth of laughter beneath a fading summer sky, all rushed back with an aching clarity. But the shadows lingered, stretching and writhing along the walls like dark water seeping through cracked stone. The faceless figures leaned closer, silent witnesses to the unspooling of memory and pain. Their presence pressed heavy, a reminder that healing was never simple or clean. I steadied myself against the battered oak table, fingers trembling but grip firm. The red glow bathed the room in a surreal light, turning parchment edges into flickering flames and turning ink to molten rivers of forgotten truth. The ledger's pages whispered secrets I hadn't been ready to hear, the cost of forgetting, the price of memory, the delicate balance between loss and reclamation. Each recipe was more than food, it was a rite, a binding of self to past and future, a delicate alchemy demanding sacrifice. As the cold spread through my veins, I realized that the diner's special was not merely a meal, but a reckoning, a communion with the fragments of who I had been and who I might yet become. The faceless forms receded slowly, shadows folding back into corners as if granting passage. The red light dimmed to a soft ember glow, warmth returning to the air. I exhaled, lungs filling with the mingled scents of old herbs and fading memories. The path ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time, I felt the fragile stirrings of hope amid the darkness. The flickering red light above the kitchen door cast elongated shadows that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. With the fragments of memory stirred by the bitter taste of the chowder and the strange ritual, I felt an urgent need to understand what tethered me to this place, and why the diner itself seemed woven into the fabric of my forgotten past. I retraced my steps back through the dim corridor, the lilac mist curling like smoke in the corners, as if guiding me deeper into a secret I'd long evaded. The jars of memories in cloudy liquid stared silently as I passed, their faded images rippling like echoes trapped beneath glass. Back in the main dining area, the empty seats and flickering neon seemed less oppressive now, but the weight of stories hung thick in the stale air. I approached the counter, where the owner had reappeared, standing silent as a sentinel. His reflective eyes held centuries of knowledge, or perhaps sorrow, and I knew he was both keeper and prisoner of this place. He spoke, voice low and steady, words like incantations. This diner is more than a refuge for the weary. It is a crossroads, a place where memories are served and debts are paid. Every special ordered here carries a soul's price, a binding to past and future alike. I listened, the pieces of the puzzle shifting, how the food bound secrets, how the recipes were rituals to unlock or bury truths, how patrons came and left changed, some forever. The owner's gaze bore into me. To reclaim what is lost, one must be willing to feast on memory itself. To taste both pain and joy, and to swallow the cost. Only then does the past become a foundation, not a chain. The hum of the diner rose again, a spectral chorus underlying the mundane sounds, the clink of silverware, the murmur of distant conversations, the flicker of neon. The diner breathed, alive with stories unspoken. I realized then that my journey was intertwined with this place, its mysteries, its rituals, and its haunting power to reveal the self hidden beneath layers of forgetting. The path ahead demanded courage, to face memories unbidden, to confront shadows both old and new, and to find wholeness amid fractured echoes. The diner owner's words lingered in the stale air, their weight pressing down like the humid dusk settling outside. I felt the gravity of the place settle deeper into my bones. This was no ordinary roadside refuge but a nexus where memory and reality blurred, and the price of passage was more than mere currency. Determined to unearth the roots of the diner's power, I ventured toward the back room where the air grew heavier, thick with the scent of aged wood and ancient herbs. The flickering bulbs cast long shadows, and the shelves bowed under the weight of forgotten relics, faded photographs, brittle journals, and weather trinkets that whispered of lives once lived. The owner followed silently, his gaze distant yet anchored in memories only he could bear. This place, he began, voice low and gravelly, was built on a crossroads, where roads meet and worlds overlap. Long ago, a circle of those who understood the thin veil gathered here. They crafted rituals, recipes not just for sustenance but for the soul. He gestured toward the stained ledger I had seen earlier, its pages worn from years of invocation and intent. Each dish carries a story, a spell woven from ingredients and memory. To eat here is to enter a pact, you exchange forgetfulness for truth, oblivion for reckoning. I absorbed his words, the threads of my own fractured past tugging at the edges of comprehension. And those who can't pay the price. They linger, he said, eyes darkening. Ghosts bound to the diner, waiting for another soul to take their place or for redemption to come. A silence fell between us, broken only by the faint hum of the neon sign outside, blinking against the encroaching night. The owner's hand brushed a locket hanging from his neck, a small, tarnished thing with an inscription worn smooth. I've been bound here longer than I remember. Keeper, prisoner, guide. I serve the circle's will, tending the crossroads. His confession hung in the air, a bridge between his burden and my unfolding story. I realized then that my journey was entwined with his, and with the mysteries of the diner, a path that demanded courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to face the deepest shadows of memory. The weight of the owner's confession settled heavily in the dim light, binding the threads of his story with my own unraveling past. I felt the gravity of the crossroads deepen, a nexus not only of roads but of souls caught between forgetting and remembering. Tell me about the circle, I urged, voice barely more than a breath. Who were they? What power did they wield? His eyes, glassy yet fierce, met mine with a flicker of something ancient and weary. Long before this diner was anything but dust and ruin, a gathering of seekers, mystics, and survivors formed here. They called themselves the Circle of Remembrance. He paused, as if reaching through time to touch memories buried beneath layers of earth and silence. The circle understood the fragile veil separating worlds. They sought to preserve stories, to bind memories in ritual and song, knowing that forgetting meant death, not just of the body, but of the soul. He traced a finger along the edges of the worn ledger, its pages etched with recipes and invocations. Each dish, each special, is a vessel, a spell that feeds on memory and offers truth in return. The circle's power was in weaving the intangible into the tangible, feeding the living with the essence of the lost. I felt a chill as his words sunk in. The diner itself was a living relic, a conduit of power and pain, a place where the boundaries between life and death, memory and oblivion, were thin and trembling. But why bind these souls here? Why this endless exchange? The owner's gaze darkened. Because some memories refuse to rest. Because some debts must be paid. Because the circle's pact was never meant to be broken. The diner is both sanctuary and prison, a place where stories are kept alive, sometimes against their will. He looked away, the weight of centuries pressing down on his broad shoulders. And I am bound to it all, the keeper of the crossroads, the guardian of those caught between. The room seemed to pulse with the echoes of uncounted lives, the soft murmurs of souls seeking peace. I realized then that my own journey was entwined not just with this place but with the very fabric of its history, and that to find release, I would have to walk through its shadows and confront the circle's legacy head-on. The weight of those alien memories pressed upon me like a second skin, uninvited, yet undeniably real. Faces and places I had never known now danced behind my eyes, mingling seamlessly with fragments of my own past. Each recollection, a teenage girl's secret scribbled in the margins of a diary, a stranger's anguished sobs in a phone booth, an old man burning letters beside a lake, pushed at the fragile boundaries of my identity. My stomach churned, a tempest of unease and disbelief. I wiped a sheen of sweat from my brow, only to see faint violet smudges left behind, a spectral residue from the diner's uncanny broth. The owner's silhouette materialized in the doorway, his gaze steady, cold, yet tinged with a cruel sort of curiosity, as if measuring how much of me remained whole. No anger. No resistance. Just an unsettling understanding. His words slithered across the stale air, every cook needs tasters. A surge of adrenaline propelled me past him, my shoulder colliding with his solid frame, but the way felt open, as if a door had quietly swung ajar. I burst into the dining room, now bathed in harsh white fluorescent light that hummed like a nest of restless hornets. The dish, the infamous special, stood empty on the counter, its oily silver residue glinting under the harsh glow. Tendrils of violet vapor curled upward, feeding the vents with an intoxicating sweetness. My lungs tightened, and panic clawed at my throat. I staggered toward the exit, the bell above the door shrieking as it slammed shut behind me. Outside, the cold night air was shockingly real. I fumbled with the keys, the engine roaring alive beneath my trembling hands. Tires screamed on gravel as I sped away, the diner shrinking into the rearview mirror, its neon sign flickering between violet and darkness. The endless desert road stretched ahead, black and merciless. Memories unraveled behind my eyes, mine and others, woven together like a tangled thread of ghosts and guilt. I whispered my name aloud, seeking an anchor in the storm of foreign voices and forgotten lives. Paranoia crept in like icy fingers, the mountains around me shifting as if alive. By dawn, I pulled into a deserted rest stop, hands shaking so violently I could barely turn off the ignition. The reflection in the dusty rearview mirror stared back, familiar yet subtly altered, as though someone had redrawn my face with strokes both younger and older. Inside my jacket pocket, the torn page from the ledger pulsed faintly with lilac light, the ink smeared but stubbornly legible. Proof of the night's unholy communion. Proof that I had stolen a taste of something no longer entirely mine. The memories pressed heavier, my brother's laughter, my mother's scent, the diner's flickering light, and the taste of secret simmered in forbidden broth. And yet, intertwined were visions of a lake I'd never visited, letters I'd never burned. Both sets of memories weighed equally on my soul. I sat there, heart pounding, scribbling these lines to ground myself in this fractured reality. The ledger page glowed softly with each beat, a beacon of the journey I could not undo. Far ahead, the highway shimmered under the rising sun, a ribbon of heat and hope. I could drive endlessly, chasing escape from the borrowed memories bleeding through my mind. But roads or prayers whispered over bowls of chowder, looping endlessly back to the place where secrets hunger for new mouths. The sun climbed higher, turning the violet edges of the page to ash gray. Yet when I exhaled, a thin lilac mist curled from my lips and dissolved into the dawn. Whose memory slipped away? I do not know. Only this, I am forever changed. And somewhere, in the distance, a dusty diner waits. Its sign flickering in the desert wind. The mirrored surfaces seemed to multiply endlessly, fracturing the space into shards of distorted reality. Each reflection held its own secret, its own whisper of presence, silent observers lurking just beyond perception. The air thickened with a cold tension, as though the very walls breathed and waited. I steadied my shaking hands and forced my gaze forward, refusing to become lost in the labyrinth of reflections. The murmurs grew louder, weaving together into a chorus of promises and threats, an ancient negotiation echoing through wood and glass. The words circled me, curling like smoke: trade flesh. Keep the shine. One step, one sliver. We bargain. My pulse thundered, the clipboard slipping from my grasp, clattering onto the floor. The sound seemed to awaken something unseen, a subtle shift in the air that prickled the edges of my skin. In the fractured reflections, shadows moved with unnatural grace, their faces obscured yet intent. They did not approach, but their presence pressed close, a silent negotiation stretching between realms. I swallowed hard, the cold seeping into my bones, and took a measured step forward. The floor vibrated beneath me, humming low and insistent, a rhythm syncing with my heartbeat. The mirrored panels pulsed faintly, the surface shimmering like liquid mercury. A whisper followed, so close I felt it brush against my ear: accept the trade. My breath caught, eyes darting to every corner, searching for escape or salvation in the maze of reflections. But the house held me fast, a living riddle woven from light, shadow, and desire. I realized then that crossing this threshold meant more than physical entry. It demanded a surrender of parts of myself, a currency I had yet to comprehend fully. The bargain had begun. The whispers tangled tighter around my mind, weaving a web of temptation and terror. Trade flesh. Keep the shine. The mantra echoed in my skull like a relentless drumbeat, each repetition chiseling away at my resolve. My eyes flicked desperately among the shifting reflections, searching for a glimpse of myself, solid, unbroken. But every mirror fractured my image, scattering it into ghostly shards, none quite whole. The silhouettes lurking just beyond the glass walls watched silently, their faceless gaze weighing heavy like judgment. A cold sweat slicked my skin as I wrestled with the bargain laid before me. To stay here meant surrendering fragments of my body, my memories, my very essence. Yet to flee risked being swallowed whole by the house's insatiable hunger, erased from reality like a forgotten dream. I gripped the edge of the dresser, knuckles white, grounding myself in the tangible. Remember who you are, I whispered, fingers tracing the grain of the wood. The house, they said, was born from a curse, a twisted sanctuary crafted centuries ago by a desperate soul seeking to preserve beauty and life through dark pacts. Each mirror was a vessel, trapping echoes of those who had bargained within its walls, their reflections immortal but imprisoned. The spectral inhabitants were the remnants of those deals, lost souls caught between worlds, bound by shimmer and shadow, forever bargaining with new arrivals. A sudden crack shattered the silence as a mirror fractured near my foot. From its broken surface, a flicker of movement, a pale hand, reaching out, yearning for release. Fear surged, but so did determination. I refused to become another ghost trapped in this glass prison. Summoning every ounce of will, I tore my gaze from the mirrors and surged toward the door, the whispered bargains clawing at my back. The floorboards groaned beneath my pounding steps, the house itself seeming to resist my escape. But with a final breath, I crossed the threshold, slamming the door behind me. The murmurs faded into silence. Outside, the sun broke through heavy clouds, light flooding the cracked earth. I stood trembling, heart racing, the bargain still etched in my soul, a reminder that some trades leave scars invisible to the eye. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, sealing off the oppressive maze of mirrors and whispers. For a moment, the world outside seemed impossibly real, warm sunlight spilling across cracked earth, birdsong threading through the brittle air. Yet beneath that fragile clarity, a shadow clung to my skin, a silent reminder of the bargain etched deep within my soul. The scars left by the house were invisible, woven into the fabric of memory and sensation. I found my reflection altered, not in the mirrors of that cursed place, but in the subtle shifts of expression, a hesitation in my eyes, as if part of me remained forever tethered to the spectral prison. In the days that followed, whispers haunted my waking hours. Flickers at the edge of vision, fleeting shapes in darkened rooms, voices that seemed to rise in the hum of the wind. The bargain was never truly broken, it echoed in the spaces between thoughts, a pulse beneath the skin. I sought answers, tracing the threads of the house's curse through old records, faded letters, and whispered legends. The story unfolded, a lineage of souls ensnared, each drawn by desire or desperation, each paying a price in flesh, memory, or will. Some vanished entirely, swallowed by the mirrored walls, their reflections trapped in endless limbo. Others returned changed, hollowed echoes of themselves, shadows walking among the living, forever bargaining for freedom they could never claim. And then there were those like me, escapes marked by loss and lingering tether, caught between worlds yet struggling to reclaim wholeness. The house remained, silent and patient, waiting for the next traveler to stumble through its door, drawn by whispered promises and unseen chains. As I walked away, the sun warm on my face, I knew the path ahead was uncertain. The curse was a wound that might never fully heal, a reminder that some bargains bind beyond breaking. Yet in that knowing lay a fragile hope, a chance to forge new stories from fractured pasts, to find light amid shadows, and to keep walking, no matter the weight of memory. In the quiet aftermath of escape, as the sun cast long shadows over the cracked earth, my thoughts drifted to others, those who had not found their way out. Their stories, like fragile threads, wove silently beneath the surface of my own fractured memories. Far from the mirrored house, in a forgotten town cloaked in fog and whispered legends, another soul wrestled with the same unseen chains. Evelyn, a woman once vibrant and fierce, now wandered corridors not of stone but of her own mind, trapped within a labyrinth of memories twisted by grief and regret. Her world was a spectral echo of a once beloved home, rooms shifting and folding like pages torn from a book rewritten by sorrow. Reflections that should have been comforting became prisons, each mirror a trap snapping shut on her spirit. Evelyn's journey was one of slow unraveling and desperate searching, a quest to reclaim pieces of herself scattered like stardust in the void. Guided by fleeting glimpses of light and the whispered songs of forgotten memories, she confronted shadows that whispered lies and truths tangled together. Meanwhile, I grappled with the lingering weight of borrowed memories, each day a delicate dance between loss and reclamation. The path to healing stretched endlessly ahead, a winding road marked by moments of clarity and haunting uncertainty. In this shared silence between stories, I realized that escape was only the first step. True freedom lay in the courage to face the fractures within, to weave the shards of past and present into a new whole. And somewhere, beneath the flickering neon of another diner, beneath the cracked walls of forgotten houses, the dance of souls continued, each seeking light in the shadows, each writing their own fragile song of survival. The weight of the dusk pressed down, the yard outside a muted canvas where shadows blended and blurred. The mirrored house seemed to pulse with hunger, its thirst for completion unyielding. The voices had shifted, no longer whispers but urgent clamors, clinging like desperate hands at the edge of reality. I tightened my grip on the handheld lantern, its light sharp and unwavering. Each pool of brightness carved a sanctuary through the creeping darkness, pushing back the reflections that twisted and writhed along the walls and floor. Yet the warning lingered, you are half here. Finish the trade. My reflection in the dim sideboard mirror haunted me, eyes hollowed and glazed, a fading echo of self struggling to hold fast. The notion that I was already partially claimed sent a shiver down my spine, but retreat meant surrender. Steeling my resolve, I advanced toward the door, laying lanterns like stepping stones to guide the fleeing shadows. The voices escalated in frantic cadence. Bring us out. Carry the bargain. Their desperation hung heavy, a siren call that threatened to fracture my sanity. Each step felt like a gamble between salvation and surrender, the boundary between this fractured world and the tangible one narrowing to a fragile thread. Finally, the threshold loomed, the old wooden door framed by the fading light of dusk. I reached out, every fiber of my being trembling, and pushed it open. The night air rushed in, a breath of freedom or the beginning of another binding. The yard stretched before me, vast and silent, shadows folding back into the growing twilight. Behind, the house seemed to pulse once more, mirrors shimmering with trapped echoes. As I stepped beyond the threshold, a final whisper brushed my mind, gentle yet irrevocable. The trade is never finished. Only passed on. The four figures stood motionless, their masks glinting faintly under the weak beam of the headlights, grins twisted into permanence, hauntingly wide and unsettling. The humid air hung thick, as if holding its breath alongside me. Mara stirred beside me, eyes fluttering open, sensing the tension like a whisper of danger brushing her skin. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles whitening, as my gaze locked onto the eerily still silhouettes. The engine remained silent, its growl extinguished as if swallowed by the oppressive silence pressing in from the forest shadows. The road behind and ahead seemed to vanish beneath a cloak of heavy fog, isolating us in this uncanny pocket beyond the map's reach. The figures did not move, but the air between us thickened, charged with a silent challenge, a riddle poised on the edge of night. The masks, delicate yet sinister, held stories etched in cracked porcelain and faded paint, whispers of forgotten carnivals and lost souls. A low murmur seeped from the forest, carried on the humid breeze, words half heard, swirling like smoke, turn back, or join the dance. My heart hammered, breath caught between fear and disbelief. Mara's fingers found mine, a fragile tether amid the mounting dread. Slowly, one figure stepped forward, the hem of the coat barely whispering against the asphalt. Their masked face tilted, the frozen grin somehow more menacing in its stillness. A chill rippled through the car as if the night itself exhaled. I knew this was no ordinary blockade. This was a threshold between worlds. And beyond these porcelain masks lay secrets older than the forest's shadows, secrets that would demand more than just the turn of a steering wheel. The masks, their cracked porcelain faces frozen in unnatural grins, were more than mere disguises. They were relics of a forgotten ritual, steeped in sorrow and ancient rites that stretched back centuries, tangled in the liminal spaces between life and death, reality and dream. Long ago, in a village much like this one but swallowed by time and silence, a carnival had come once every decade, a fleeting breath of color and joy against the gray monotony of rural life. But this carnival was unlike any other. It was a gathering of souls lost and wandering, those caught between worlds, between breaths, between memories. The masks were crafted by a master artisan rumored to be touched by otherworldly hands. Each was imbued with a fragment of a trapped spirit, a sorrow too great to release, a joy too fierce to forget. When worn, these masks bound the wearer's fate to that spirit, merging their paths in an eternal dance. The carnival's purpose was both a celebration and a curse, a ritual to keep restless souls tethered, to channel their yearning into movement and mirth, lest their grief spill unchecked into the waking world. But those who wore the masks were forever changed, captives of a dance that could never end, their true faces lost beneath layers of porcelain and paint. The black coats, flowing like shadows, symbolized the veil between worlds, the thin line the dancers crossed with every step. The masks' frozen smiles hid the pain and the stories no living tongue could tell. In the dark woods where the carnival had once set its ephemeral stage, the dance was said to continue unseen, a ghostly procession weaving between trees and shadows. Those who encountered the masked figures were glimpsing a fragment of that endless ritual, a warning, a challenge, or perhaps an invitation to join the dance forever. The masks were both prison and key, holding within them the weight of memory and the price of forgetting. And now, standing at the edge of that ritual's reach, I knew that beneath their cracked grins lay a choice, one that demanded sacrifice, courage, and the will to face the dance or turn away into the unknown. The car lurched forward, hesitant at first, then gained steady momentum as the masks faded into the darkness behind us. The road curved ahead, but the weight of the trade pressed heavily on my mind. The hour I'd surrendered was gone, slipped away like grains of silver sand spilling through unseen cracks, and with it, a fragment of the present dissolved into shadow. Mara's fingers trembled as she gripped the dashboard, eyes wide and searching. Her voice was a whisper, fragile against the hum of the engine. "Do you feel it? Like something's missing?" I nodded, swallowing hard. The clarity of earlier moments, our laughter, the curve of the road, the warmth of this night, already blurred at the edges, fading into a haze where time folded back on itself. The unseen narrator's presence lingered, threading through my thoughts like a cold wind. Trade time, gain passage. Lose a part of yourself. Outside, the night deepened, trees blurring past like ghosts, their branches clutching at the fading light. The road stretched onward, a ribbon unraveling between the known and the unknowable. I glanced at Mara, her face pale but resolute. Together, we were bound now, not just by the road, but by the invisible hours lost and memories surrendered. The masks, the hourglasses, the whispering bargain, they were echoes of a timeless dance, a cruel rhythm that pulled travelers into loops of choice and consequence. And as the engine's distant growl faded into the night, I realized the road ahead was no longer measured by miles, but by moments given, taken, and forever altered. The road stretched endlessly ahead, but the world around us had shifted. Time felt fractured, like shards of a broken mirror reflecting moments out of order. The hour I had traded was gone, slipped into some shadowy ledger beyond reach, and its absence pressed heavy on my mind. Mara's gaze flickered with unease as she traced invisible patterns on the dashboard. "Did you lose something else? A memory? A feeling?" I reached to hold her hand, grounding myself in the tangible warmth amid the unraveling fabric of now. But even that touch felt fragile, as though it could dissolve like mist if held too tightly. The trade had come at a price beyond measure, not just time, but the subtle threads that weave experience into identity. I found myself forgetting small things, the scent of rain on dry earth, the sound of Mara's laugh from earlier, details that once defined us. Conversations from the night began to blur, replaced by a haunting silence within my thoughts. The road, once a ribbon of certainty, now curled back on itself, memories folding like origami in the corners of my mind. Sleep offered no respite. Dreams were fragmented and elusive, scenes shifting like flickering slides without narrative. I woke grasping at shadows, fingers closing on nothing. Mara confided she felt adrift, as if an unseen tide pulled at her essence. We shared moments of clarity, flickers of recognition, only to have them fade, replaced by a growing void. The hourglass had not merely stolen time, it had carved away at the very foundation of our presence, leaving us tethered to a place between moments, neither fully here nor wholly lost. Yet, amid the fading, a determination took root. We resolved to reclaim what was lost, not by reversing the trade, but by forging new memories, new bonds strong enough to anchor us. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with the risk of further loss. But together, we pressed on, chasing fragments of light through the encroaching dusk. Because in a world where time is borrowed and moments vanish, love and presence become acts of rebellion, defiant beacons against the unraveling. The violet dawn stretched before us like a fragile promise, the sky slowly bleeding light into the sleeping world. The road ahead was straight and endless, a ribbon of asphalt unspooling into the horizon. Mara's breath steadied beside me, her fingers still trembling but no longer gripping mine in panic. The oppressive weight of the loop, the relentless repetition of that cursed curve, had lifted, at least for now. Yet beneath the relief, a quiet unease lingered. The bargain remained, a debt paid, but not fully understood. Something intangible had slipped from us in exchange for escape, a fragment of time, a shard of memory now lost in the folds of the night. The dashboard clock lay dark, the radio silent. Only the steady hum of the engine filled the space between us, grounding us in the here and now, yet reminding us how easily that presence could be torn away. Mara glanced at me, eyes still rimmed with the ghost of fear, searching for answers I didn't have. I offered a weak smile, though my heart still hammered with the echo of the masked quartet's frozen grins and the whispered terms of their cruel trade. We had stepped beyond the loop, but the road was no longer just a path, it was a reminder that time is a fragile currency, spent and borrowed with unseen cost. As the violet light deepened into dawn, I vowed to hold tight to the moments left, to weave new memories strong enough to outshine the shadows. Because in a world where time itself can bind or betray, presence becomes the fiercest act of defiance. The violet dawn unfurled slowly, brushing the sky with pale light that softened the sharp edges of night's shadows. The highway stretched before us like a ribbon of hope, winding away from the loop that had threatened to consume us. Yet the silence inside the car was thick, heavy with the weight of unspoken questions and lingering unease. Mara's fingers finally loosened their grip on mine, but her eyes remained searching, haunted by the memory of those frozen grins and swirling sands. I reached over, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead, grounding myself, and her, in the fragile present. "We're free," I said, voice steady but cautious. "For now." She nodded, though her breath trembled. But what did we lose? What part of us stayed behind? I didn't have answers. The hourglass had stolen time, yes, but it had taken something deeper, something intangible. Memories slipped away like water through fingers, replaced by an echoing emptiness that neither of us could quite fill. The road ahead promised distance, but distance felt uncertain when time itself had betrayed us. We drove on, each mile a quiet act of defiance against the invisible bond still tugging at our souls. At a rest stop beneath the swelling light, we paused. I leaned against the hood, staring up as the sky brightened, colors bleeding from violet to gold. Mara remained inside, tracing patterns on the window, lost in thought. "I think," she said quietly, "we have to make new memories, stronger ones. Fill the spaces that were hollowed out." I agreed, knowing that healing would be neither swift nor simple. The journey forward was one of reclamation, gathering fragments, forging connection, resisting the erasure that threatened to consume. And somewhere deep inside, I felt the stirrings of hope, fragile, yes, but fiercely alive. Because in a world where time can be borrowed or stolen, the greatest victory is to keep moving, to keep remembering, and to keep loving. The days that followed were a fragile mosaic of reclaimed moments, small victories stitched together against the fraying edges of forgotten time. One morning, Mara and I woke to the scent of rain mingling with fresh coffee. We brewed a pot together, laughter bubbling as we fumbled with the ancient French press. The ritual was simple, yet sacred, a deliberate act to anchor us in the present. Later, we walked along a sun-dappled trail, leaves crunching beneath our feet. Mara paused to press a wildflower into the pages of a journal, her fingers steady despite the tremor in her heart. "This," she said softly, "is ours. A new memory." At night, we pored over old photographs, naming faces and places, reclaiming histories from the haze. Each story shared was a thread pulling us back from the void. There were moments of frustration, words on the tip of the tongue lost like sand slipping through fingers, details of evenings evaporating before sleep. But we met those gaps with patience, with gentle reminders and whispered reassurances. One evening, beneath a canopy of stars, we danced in the quiet living room, music weaving through us like a balm. The world outside might shift and twist, but here, now, we were whole. Slowly, the hollow spaces inside us softened, filled with new stories, new love, new presence. Rebuilding was not about reclaiming what was lost but creating something stronger, something that could endure the shadows. And as dawn broke over the horizon, I realized that while the past might haunt, the future belonged to those brave enough to hold tight to each fleeting, precious moment. The warning loomed before us like a sentence unfinished, a fragment hanging in the darkness, heavy with unspoken dread. The road stretched endless, swallowed by shadow and silence, a threshold that neither map nor memory could contain. Dylan stirred again, his eyes flickering open, but the haze around us thickened, time folding in on itself like creased paper. The radio hissed, breaths caught between static, as if the air itself was trying to speak a language lost to human ears. The truck's pulsating beams morphed into a rhythm, a code etched into my nerves, weaving dread through every cell. The coordinates it demanded, impossible and infinite, felt like a summons to a place beyond the world's edge, a void where reality frayed and the soul hung precariously. My grip tightened, heart pounding a fractured beat. The fuel gauge blinked low, but stopping felt like surrender, a risk of vanishing into the unknown behind us. Dylan's voice broke through, hesitant and thin. What if this isn't a truck, but a guide? Or a warning? I swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the cracked sign, a last stop to nowhere, or perhaps a crossroads where time itself ceased to flow. Ahead, the highway darkened, the edge of the known dissolving into the abyss. The code pulsed again, relentless and cold. In this twilight road, every mile was a question, every heartbeat a challenge. And somewhere in the unyielding night, the answer waited, just beyond the last sign. The rhythmic pulse of the rig's headlights carved into my mind like a relentless metronome, each flash a coded summons that rattled my nerves. I pulled the car closer to the shoulder, heart pounding, fingers trembling on the wheel as the black silhouette of the 18-wheeler loomed like a phantom. I fumbled for my phone, fingers slick with sweat, trying to cross-reference the strange coordinates etched in my memory with any map app. Nothing matched. The longitude stretched beyond the edge of every chart, a place that shouldn't exist, yet the rig insisted otherwise. Dylan's eyes darted between the road and the ghostly truck. You think it's trying to lead us somewhere? I nodded slowly. Or trap us? The rig's pulse shifted, faster now, a frantic Morse code spilling secrets I couldn't yet translate. I tapped back on the steering wheel, matching rhythm, desperate to communicate. The radio crackled, a brittle whisper threading through static, but no clear message emerged. Sweat dripped down my temples as the highway warped beneath the strobing light. Mile markers faded into whitewashed posts, each passing shadow seeming to stretch and lean closer. I swallowed the copper taste flooding my mouth, adrenaline sharpening my senses to a razor's edge. A sudden flash lit the cracked sign ahead, last stop 2 mi, then plunged us back into shadow. The incomplete message gnawed at me, a riddle waiting to be solved or a warning too late. The truck's taillights shimmered and flickered, then, with a sudden lurch, the rig moved aside, not to pass, but to reveal a narrow, twisting dirt path veering off the highway. The pulsing lights beckoned, as if inviting us into the unknown. I glanced at Dylan, whose jaw clenched in quiet resolve. Do we follow? Every instinct screamed no. But the silence behind us was heavier, the unknown ahead no less daunting. I shifted the gear, steering toward the dirt path, tires crunching over loose gravel as the forest closed in on both sides. The rig's headlights faded behind the curtain of trees, but its message lingered, an echo in the darkness, pulling us deeper into a mystery that might rewrite time itself. The landscape warped as the highway bent into itself, like a Mobius strip folding under the weight of impossible geometry. Every turn seemed both new and familiar, each mile swallowed by the unrelenting loop of coordinates that refused to anchor us anywhere real. Dylan's face flickered in my peripheral vision, his features blurring into something unrecognizable, as if the steady flow of time eroded even the solidity of those closest to me. His voice came muffled, distant, words slipping like water through a cracked sieve. The rig's taillights pulsed behind us, marking the rhythm of my unraveling sanity. The odometer danced erratically, digits skipping and reversing, each number an invocation stripping away pieces of my identity. The memories, the birthdays, the faces, the laughter, fractured and dissolved, replaced by shadows and silence. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white, desperate to hold on to something tangible, but the road beneath us twisted and stretched like a living thing, pulling me further into a place where maps were meaningless and time unraveled like thread. The metal signs hammered into the roadside bore the same impossible coordinates again and again, a litany etched in cold steel, reminding me that I was trapped within a geometry not meant for human minds, a prison without walls, where the only escape was to confront what the rig sought to claim. As the sky darkened and the strange green fuel pulsed faintly in my tank, I realized the bargain was far from over. Each kilometer lost was a price paid in fragments of life, a slow bleed of self that might one day leave me a hollow passenger in a car racing an endless, unknowable road. The highway stretched ahead, infinite and inscrutable. And the rig waited behind, its code relentless, counting the moments until the final grain slipped away. The fading world pressed closer, shadows lengthening as my memories slipped through my fingers like dry sand. Each kilometer swallowed by the rig's relentless chase gnawed away at the threads that tethered me to my own past. Faces blurred, names dissolved, moments once vivid now reduced to fractured echoes in the fog of my mind. But surrender was a temptation I could not afford. I reached deep within, grasping for fragments, snatches of laughter, the warmth of Mara's hand, the feel of sunlight on my skin. I forced myself to speak aloud, anchoring thoughts to sound. Remember, the lake at dawn, your favorite song. The words trembled, fragile anchors in the storm. Dylan stirred beside me, confusion flickering in his eyes. What's happening to us? Memory is our battlefield now, I replied, voice rough. We fight to keep ourselves whole. I scoured my phone, notes, anything that could hold pieces of who I was. Photos blurred, texts jumbled, but some things remained stubbornly intact, moments etched deep enough to resist the erosion. I started to document everything, dates, names, places. A record to fend off the creeping oblivion. One night, as sleep teased my eyes, a whisper stirred beneath the noise, the faintest thread of a forgotten melody, a song Mara sang long ago. I clung to it, replaying the tune until it wove a fragile tapestry of memory around my unraveling mind. Days bled into nights, and each small victory, a recalled smile, a remembered touch, became a beacon against the encroaching void. The rig's presence lingered, a shadow at the edge of perception, but the fight within me burned brighter. Because to reclaim a life stolen grain by grain, I had to become more than a passenger in the relentless loop, I had to become a keeper of my own story. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. Home, I said, though the word felt foreign, like a hope borrowed from someone else's dream. Dylan nodded, eyes distant but searching, as if piecing together fragments I no longer fully held. The highway stretched ahead, real, or as real as anything felt anymore, lined with familiar signs and gentle curves. Yet beneath the veneer of normalcy, I knew the battle wasn't over. The backward count on the odometer whispered that time was still slipping through our fingers, moments bleeding away with every mile. The radio hummed a soft, haunting melody, half-remembered and incomplete, echoing the fractured rhythm of our journey. Dylan's gaze flicked to the dial, a question unspoken hanging between us. Do you think we've escaped the loop? Or just traded one for another? I didn't have an answer. But as the night gave way to dawn, and the first fragile light touched the road, I resolved to hold tight to what remained, to the present moment, to Dylan's steady breath beside me, and to the fragile thread of memory that tethered us still. Because sometimes survival isn't about reclaiming every lost fragment, but about finding strength in what endures. The pale light of dawn stretched over the horizon, casting long, gentle shadows across the road. Each mile felt less like a fading thread and more like a stitch, binding the frayed edges of our fragmented selves. The weight of the night's terrors lingered, but beneath it, a fragile resolve began to pulse, steady and warm. We pulled off at a quiet rest stop, a simple place with worn benches and the faint scent of pine drifting through the morning air. Mara and Dylan stepped out, stretching limbs stiff from the relentless drive, faces softened by the gentle caress of sunrise. I watched them, sensing the unspoken struggle beneath their smiles, the battle to reclaim pieces of who they once were, and who they might yet become. We spoke little at first, words too heavy to carry. Instead, we focused on small acts, sharing a meal, tracing patterns in the dirt, naming the constellations emerging above us. Each moment was an anchor, a declaration against the eroding tide. At night, we gathered around a flickering campfire, its flames dancing like fragile hope. Mara hummed a melody half-remembered, and Dylan recited fragments of stories from their childhoods, faint echoes that shimmered in the firelight. I took to journaling, pouring scattered memories onto pages, capturing the fleeting before they vanished. The act of writing became a lifeline, a reclamation of narrative from the chaos. Healing was neither linear nor swift. Days blurred, moments of clarity gave way to shadows of doubt. But together, we held space for the fractured pieces to mend, fragile threads woven anew with patience and care. The road ahead remained uncertain, but each sunrise brought renewed light, a quiet promise that, though time might be borrowed or lost, the heart's capacity to remember and to love endures beyond all shadows. The silence in the apartment grew thicker with each arrival, the shadows deepening as if they absorbed light itself. No sound betrayed the presence that watched, recorded, waited. The photographs weren't just images, they were a slow, creeping invasion, each one peeling away the boundaries between observer and observed. I felt naked beneath their gaze, every private moment fractured and exposed. The bruised rectangle on the living room wall was no longer just a shadow but a fissure, a doorway threatening to fracture the very fabric of my sanctuary. I considered fleeing, but the city outside felt a cage without keys. Each step away from home only deepened the disorientation, a fog settling in my mind, erasing the line between past and present, self and shadow. Desperation drove me to seek answers in the old texts I kept tucked away, folklore of watchers and mirrors, of shadows that slipped between worlds to mark and claim. Stories spoke of the scribes, invisible chroniclers of lives, cursed to document endlessly without interference, yet their presence brought ruin in their wake. The photographs were their ink, the apartment their canvas. I resolved to fight the silence. To reclaim my space, I began marking the apartment with wards, salt lines, scattered herbs, candles flickering against the creeping dark. Each ritual was a whispered defiance, a plea to the unseen forces that chronicled my unraveling. But the photographs continued arriving, impossible and relentless, each depicting moments I tried desperately to forget, and moments I hadn't lived yet, previews of the encroaching fracture. And in the endless quiet, I wondered, was I merely a subject to be recorded, or could I become the author of my own story again? The image on my screen was chillingly clear, my own body caught in a frame, frozen mid-step, the door looming inches from my outstretched hand. But behind me, shadows shifted unnaturally, shapes coalescing that I couldn't see with my own eyes. The violet glow seeped deeper into the frame, twisting and pulsating like a living thing. My breath caught as the image flickered, then snapped into darkness. I lowered the phone slowly, heart hammering like a drumbeat echoing in an empty cavern. The door remained, silent, still, yet brimming with an ominous life all its own. The brass knob gleamed under the faint light, tempting and terrible. Every instinct screamed to retreat, to flee the apartment, but I was rooted in place, caught between primal fear and the desperate hope that I could confront this shadow before it consumed me. Fingers trembling, I raised the flashlight once more, the beam slicing through the thick darkness, casting long, quivering shadows across the swirling wood grain. The door seemed to pulse, as if breathing. A whisper brushed my ear, a sound too soft for words, yet loaded with meaning, enter. My throat tightened, panic pressing at my ribs. Was this an invitation or a trap? I clenched the bleach spray like a talisman and stepped closer. The air grew colder, the violet light thickening like mist curling out from the door's edges. As my hand reached for the knob, the apartment seemed to hold its breath. A single creak echoed, a slow, deliberate sound like the first note of a dirge. The door began to open. The morning sun filtered weakly through the grime-coated windows, casting a pale glow over the room. Yet the weight of the night's events clung stubbornly, an invisible residue that no light could dissolve. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart still pounding, mind tangled between dread and determination. The envelope's presence, now buried beneath refuse, felt like a fragile truce, temporary, uneasy. Part of me feared what might come next, the unseen observer waiting patiently for a crack in my resolve. Another photograph. Another door. Another invitation or demand from the shadows pressing at the edges of my world. Yet I knew hiding was no longer an option. To reclaim my life, I had to confront the fracture, step through the threshold I feared, illuminate the darkness with whatever light I could summon. I gathered my scattered courage, resolved to face the unknown not as prey, but as a seeker. The door in the wall was no longer just a haunting image, it was a challenge, a passage to answers or oblivion. As twilight descended once more, I prepared myself, bulbs, bleach, camera, tools both mundane and mystical. I would intercept the next message, capture the unseen, and break the cycle before it could claim another fragment of my soul. Because some doors, no matter how terrifying, must be opened to find the way home. Among the items was a small notebook, its leather cover cracked and worn, the pages fluttering as if stirred by a phantom breeze. The double's hands trembled as he flipped through, eyes scanning hastily. A weathered compass dangled from a string, swinging slowly, though there was no movement to provoke it. Then, from the backpack, he drew a candle much like the one flickering inside the cabin, placing it carefully on a tiny table. The cabin seemed to pulse with life, its wooden walls breathing softly in sync with our ragged breaths. I could feel the thin veil separating reality and this miniature echo thinning dangerously. The double's gaze lifted, locking with mine through the miniature doorway. In those eyes, I saw the same fear and fractured determination that coursed through my own veins. It was as though the cabin housed a mirror not just of space, but of soul, a trap or sanctuary, I could not yet tell. A sudden gust whipped through the clearing, rustling leaves in a frantic dance. The cabin shifted again, its size expanding, edges warping, stretching toward me. I gripped the tiny porch tighter, every muscle coiled, heart hammering an urgent tattoo. The distant moan swelled into a howl that reverberated through the forest floor, shaking loose the brittle branches overhead. The boundary between the toy and the world blurred further as the cabin's presence threatened to spill beyond its fragile frame. I realized then that this was no mere artifact but a vessel, a pocket realm reflecting my inner turmoil, a physical manifestation of the battle to contain the encroaching void. To survive, I would have to confront not only the impossible cabin but the fractured self it held captive within its flickering shadows. A whisper coiled out of the doorway, soft, almost melodic, but carrying the weight of endless echoes. It curled around the hollow outline of my duplicate, slipping beneath the flickering candlelight like a silken thread weaving through fragile glass. The voice was neither cruel nor kind, simply ancient and patient, waiting for a response that might never come. The words were indistinct, a language older than memory itself, yet I understood their meaning not by sound but by feeling. You have paid the price of forgetting, but at what cost? The self unmoored is a ship without anchor. Will you reclaim your past, or drift forever among shadows? My throat tightened. The emptiness inside me pulsed, aching with absence. The compass, once a talisman of guidance and stories shared by fireside, was now a fragment lost in the vast sea of erasure. I longed for the warmth of those moments, the laughter, the scent of wood smoke, but they slipped through my grasp like mist. The duplicate lifted a hand again, fingers trembling as if reaching for something just beyond reach. I matched the motion, the mirrored gesture binding us in silent communion. Yet the connection was thin, fragile, like a thread stretched too taut, threatening to snap. A shiver ran through me as the candle guttered, casting the room into deeper shadows. The whisper returned, now layered with voices, fragments of my own thoughts, memories not my own, and the silent chorus of those lost to the same labyrinth. The cabin began to pulse softly, a living heart beating in miniature. Light shimmered along the walls, revealing fleeting images, faces blurred, places half-remembered, emotions frozen in amber. Each flicker a reminder that memory is both gift and prison. I realized then that the journey was far from over. To reclaim what was lost, I would need to face not only the shadows outside but the fractures within. The cabin was not just a reflection, it was a crucible, testing the very essence of who I was. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered back to the hollow figure, a vow born on fragile breath, I will find my way home, even if the path is paved with forgetting. The candle flared one last time, then steadied, its light a fragile beacon against the encroaching dark. The river's surface was unnaturally still, a mirror without flaw, reflecting the darkening sky and the twisted silhouettes of skeletal trees. The silence pressed heavier here, thick enough to choke the breeze itself. I crouched near the edge, fingertips brushing cold water that refused to ripple, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting. A faint glow pulsed beneath the surface, soft, violet, alive. My heart stuttered. Leaning closer, I saw shapes coiling in the depths, indistinct forms shifting between solid and shadow. Whispers curled around my ears, too soft to catch, like forgotten secrets barely remembered. The boot prints behind me seemed to burn into the earth, a trail fading into absence, beckoning towards something unseen. The campfire's charred maps promised paths, but none led back. I felt the weight of those who'd vanished, their stories left tangled in smoke and silence. Compelled by a mix of dread and resolve, I stepped into the river's edge, cold biting through my boots. The water held me for a heartbeat, then released. I followed the vanished path's direction, footsteps hesitant, the forest's breath growing colder, thicker. Every step whispered of lost souls, of wanderers caught between worlds, and of a map that never ends, an endless journey through spaces where memory blurs and the earth itself conspires to forget. The charcoal crumbles in my grip, fragile as a spider's web under a sudden breeze. Panic tightens its grip, but the totem's whispered warning thrums in my bones, complete the trace or lose the trail. Every fiber of my being screams to finish, to not become another lost echo in this haunted forest. With shaking hands, I press on, sketching the winding trail through the thicket, each mark igniting the undergrowth into life, a living map breathing with every stroke. Shadows flicker at the edges, the forest watching, waiting, as if the trees themselves hold their breath. A sudden rustle behind me sends a jolt of cold fear down my spine. Turning, I catch only a fleeting silhouette melting into the night, a figure indistinct yet somehow familiar, like a half-forgotten memory surfacing from a dark pool. The totem's lattice pulses faintly, the lattice rings vibrating in sync with my heartbeat. I push forward, mindful not to cross the charcoal lines behind me. The air thickens, dense with anticipation, each step a fragile dance between survival and oblivion. The path ahead narrows, twisting toward the faint glow of the ranger station. The ink on the map grows dimmer, feeding on time and willpower alike. My breath is ragged, the cold bite of fear burns in my lungs. One misstep, one falter, and the forest will close behind me, erasing the trail, and me. Yet, amidst the suffocating tension, a glimmer of resolve flickers. Each line drawn is a reclaiming, a declaration that I will not be forgotten, that I will walk this dark labyrinth and emerge, tethered to memory and self. The totem's voice hovers just beyond hearing, a mantra coaxing me onward, a reminder that the forest's grip is not absolute, only the unfinished shall perish. With charcoal stub clenched tight, I press on into the blackness, tracing not just a path through trees but a fragile journey toward reclaiming what was almost lost. The map's blankness feels both like a release and a loss, a fragile reset after a night tethered to terror and tenuous survival. I sink into a worn wooden chair, limbs shaking, skin prickling as the weight of the forest's breath seems to still just beyond the windowpane. The silence presses, thick as velvet, yet behind it I sense a pulse, faint but insistent, as if the forest itself exhales, holding its breath, waiting for the next move. My hands linger over the empty sheets, as if willing the charcoal lines to reappear, to guide me once more through that shadowed maze. But the paper remains soft and forgiving, devoid of the cruel task that nearly unmade me. Outside, the wind stirs the pines, leaves whispering secrets I almost understand. The lamp's glow flickers, casting long shadows that sway like the lingering memories I fought to reclaim, and nearly lost. In this fragile reprieve, I realized that the trail I traced was more than a path through woods, it was a journey into the fragile corridors of my mind, a contest against forgetting, against the dark-reaching tendrils of erasure. Tomorrow, I will return to the forest, to the silence between branches and the pulse beneath the earth. But tonight, I sit here, a fragile tether to what remains, breathing steady, guarding against the slow unraveling of self. Because memory is not just the past, it is the fragile compass that points me home, even when the world bends and blurs around me. The night deepened, a velvet shroud pierced only by the soft, relentless pulse of the distant drum. Each beat resonated inside my chest like an echo of the earth's own heart, drawing me closer to the secret that pulsed beneath the clay village. The masks, now silhouettes against the gloom, seemed to lean forward, inhaling the dark and exhaling a frozen mist that curled toward me like silent fingers brushing skin. Sleep came in shards, fractured by whispers curling at the edges of the clearing, voices that were never quite words but carried the weight of unsaid warnings. I dreamt of the clay huts breathing slow, swollen with unseen life, their walls pulsing with the rhythm of those drums. Faces appeared in the clay, ghostly visages of vanished villagers, their eyes hollow but alive with sorrow and something older, awaiting. At dawn, the mist lingered like a shroud. The clearing felt smaller, as if the earth itself had drawn the circle tighter overnight. The masks hung still now, but their fog clung thicker to the roots and stones. I rose stiffly, every movement shadowed by the knowledge that I was a trespasser in a place where time and memory folded into the clay and the breath of the earth. I knew that the masks were more than wood and moss, they were guardians, vessels of stories and souls, suspended between the living and the forgotten. The vapor they exhaled carried echoes of histories buried beneath the soil, of lives traded, erased, and remembered in fragments. The drum's beat called me again, and I understood, to enter this circle was to confront the breath of memory itself. To listen closely was to risk being woven into the clay's song, a note that might never be unplayed. I stood, chest heaving, as the silence stretched deeper than it should have, longer than I thought any space could hold. The mask shattered beneath my fingers, its fragile edge crumbling into the earth like a forgotten secret. The air felt thinner now, like it had been holding its breath alongside me. Yet something stirred beneath the stillness, a vibration beneath my feet, low and steady, like a pulse that never stops. It hummed through my chest, through my skull. The clay around me seemed to shift. The floor was no longer solid beneath my boots. The hut walls, once firm and confined, now seemed to stretch outward, elongating as if in response to something distant, something ancient, stretching to meet me. The ground beneath my feet felt as though it were breathing, a gentle up and down, like the pulse of some sleeping giant just beginning to stir. Outside, the air had thickened, the mist from the mask still hanging in the air, now settling into tendrils that circled the edges of the clearing. The clearing itself felt less like a place and more like a stage, drawn into the gravity of something unfathomable. The drums had stopped, but the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy with something unspoken, an unfulfilled promise. The edges of my vision blurred, the space between me and the outside world growing distant. The mist coiled around the hut, tightening the air until I felt as though I were suffocating within it. I closed my eyes, but I could still feel the weight of the presence in the jungle, the heavy gaze that never left, like the world was watching, waiting for me to make my next move. I turned slowly toward the opening, but when I tried to walk toward it, my legs refused to move. It wasn't fear, no, this was something more insidious. Something within the earth had caught me in its pull. I reached for the door frame, but instead of feeling the familiar roughness of wood, my hands sunk into a liquid that felt like clay. The walls shimmered, distorting as though the room itself were changing, stretching, pulling in on me. I gasped and pulled my hand back. My heartbeat quickened, and panic surged through my chest. That's when I heard it. A low whisper. A hum. Not from outside, but inside me. Finish what you began. The words pressed into my mind like cold iron. They were unmistakable, as if the very air itself had spoken them, the earth breathing them into existence. The force behind the words was palpable, an undeniable pull, a compulsion to act. To finish. I looked down at the broken pieces of the mask scattered across the floor. The pieces lay still, but each one felt like it was alive, humming with energy, vibrating with something ancient. Something hungry. I stumbled backward, the whispers closing in like a tide. The walls of the hut pressed inward, the wooden beams now seeming more like bones of some immense creature, hunched and waiting. And as I backed further into the corner, I saw it, the shadow in the doorway, not human, but something else. Something much larger. Its form wavered, blurred, shifting between realities. It didn't need to take shape to be felt. Its presence reached out, cold fingers brushing the back of my neck. My heart hammered, my breath shallow. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The pull was overwhelming, suffocating. I had to finish the mask. No. I had to destroy it. It was the only way to escape this. I understood that now. The mask was a conduit, an anchor, drawing the forest and its memories together in a single point. The land was breathing, feeding, pulling its essence into me. If I completed the mask, I would become part of it. But if I destroyed it, if I shattered the connection, it would sever the path. It would break the ritual. The forest would collapse, and whatever remained of this place would cease to exist. I turned, grabbed a jagged piece of the broken mask, and hurled it at the wall. It hit with a sickening thud. The room quivered, and the ground beneath me rumbled. The air grew thick again, the darkness closing in. But as I stepped back from the wreckage, I realized the room wasn't shaking anymore. The oppressive weight, the pull, it had stopped. Everything was still. The whispers had ceased. I stumbled toward the door, but when I stepped out into the clearing, the world had changed. The trees were still, the mist had dissipated. The clearing was empty, the masks gone. No flickering eyes. No murmurs. Just the raw, untouched silence of a place that had never known intrusion. And for a moment, I thought I had escaped. But then, at the edge of the clearing, I saw something, or rather, I felt something. A presence. Something that hadn't left. Something that still lingered. It was in the soil. In the air. It was the memory of the mask. Of the ritual. Of the forest's heartbeat. And the earth whispered, waiting, for me to remember. To return. And I knew, then, that my story was not over. The forest would always breathe. And I would always be part of it. The watch needle jerked again, its rhythm sending shocks through my body. I swallowed hard, blinking rapidly as I felt my pulse match the erratic thrum of the strange timepiece. My chest tightened, and the sensation of 1,000 heartbeats against the skin grew overwhelming. I let go of the wheel, my fingers tingling as if they had been pressed into a live wire. I reached for the watch. The second it was back in my hands, my heartbeat slowed, syncing with the mechanical ticking in my palm. A strange sense of calm washed over me, though I couldn't place why. My mind scrambled for logic. Had the watch been linked to my pulse? Was this some trick, a bizarre prank played by the driver or a phantom mechanic? I flipped the watch over in my hands, tracing the smooth metal surface. On the back, a series of symbols etched into the gold casing shimmered faintly. They didn't belong to any language I recognized. A swirl, a spiral, an hourglass, and a jagged line cutting through all of them. The symbols seemed to move as I watched it, shifting like ink in water, and the moment I blinked, the watch's rhythmic ticking seemed to harmonize with something deeper, like it was syncing with some ancient pulse I couldn't quite hear. Suddenly, the car jolted. Not a small bump or misalignment from the suspension, but a violent shift that snapped my head back. The seatbelt tightened around my chest like a vice. The watch, still in my hand, trembled violently, vibrating with an energy I could feel deep inside my bones. The lights in the bay flickered, then went out completely. The interior light buzzed on its last legs, casting a faint, eerie glow across the space around me. And in that dark, the shadows seemed to gather in strange, unnatural ways. I turned my head, searching for some kind of cause, but the only movement came from the way the shadow stretched, reaching out toward the edges of the room. Before I could react, the car shook again, harder this time. The needle in the watch spun wildly as if responding to an outside force. I could feel the air in the garage change, thickening, almost with a sentient presence. I could no longer hear the rain tapping against the roof. Instead, the silence pressed in, suffocating. I dropped the watch. My fingers fumbled to unclasp the seatbelt, but the moment I touched the buckle, the garage door behind me slammed shut with a deafening clang. My breath caught in my throat. The flicker of the dome light grew faster, like the rapid beating of a heart, something not mine. I needed to get out. I lunged for the door, twisting the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged. My pulse raced in my throat as the light flickered even faster now. Shadows bled into the corners of my vision, stretching impossibly long. I could feel the weight of something watching me, closing in on me from all sides, but when I looked around, there was nothing except for the endless rhythm of the watches ticking and the thickening air pressing down. A voice, not a whisper, but a voice that vibrated through the metal walls, spoke directly into my mind. "Don't leave yet. You've only just arrived." I froze. The voice wasn't familiar, but it was unmistakably clear. It wasn't from anyone in the room. There was no one else. Just me, the car, the watch, and the shadows closing in. I couldn't breathe. My chest constricted as if something had gripped my ribs with cold, sharp fingers. I shook my head, refusing to listen, refusing to be a part of whatever this was. But the watch, oh, the watch, it pulsed in my hand, warm now, the surface slick with sweat. I could feel the heartbeat matching my own, steady now, keeping pace with me, keeping me in place. The space around me hummed, vibrating like a tuning fork struck in the deepest part of my brain. The door refused to open, my hand frozen to the handle. And the shadows, they gathered, they surged. They took form, shaped themselves into something that resembled figures, human figures, or at least something close. Their faces were indistinct, featureless, but they were there, hovering just out of reach. Their hollow eyes fixed on me. I couldn't run. I couldn't hide. The voice pressed in again, this time sharper, as though forcing the words through a barrier in my skull. "You are already part of it. Time, space, the world, you belong now. We belong together." I snapped my head toward the watch. I needed to get rid of it. I needed to end this. But before I could react, the figures moved. Slowly, they reached out, extending toward me, their forms still shifting, morphing, until they were almost a blur of motion. My vision was too distorted, too fuzzy, and the watch kept pulsing, urging me to stay still. With a final breath, I raised my hands, clutching the watch, my trembling fingers barely able to hold it. I pressed it hard against the seat, feeling the metal press into my palm. I closed my eyes. A scream, barely my own, tore through my chest. And when I opened my eyes again, the world had changed. The needle clicked, displacing the silence as though a lock had fallen into place. My chest tightened, heart battering against its cage. Every breath felt suddenly and violently out of sync, as if the watch had seized control again, pulling me toward its rhythm rather than my own. I grabbed the wheel, white-knuckled, desperate to stop the rush of blood that surged faster, too fast. The watch's tick sounded too loud in the cabin, like it was growing within me. The vibrations in the steering column grew harsher, as if the car's frame was alive, pulsing with a power that had no reason to exist. A grinding noise reverberated, something deep inside the engine bay, metal scraping on metal. A wave of nausea curled in my stomach, and I forced my hand away from the wheel. My vision blurred as the pounding of my pulse drowned out everything else. The clock on the wall ticked louder in my ears, synchronized with my racing heart, a mockery of every tick and tock that had led me here. The world outside the car windows faded into a dull, oppressive gray. I could feel the walls closing in, like I was being pulled into some deep, unseen void. Time stretched, bent, and warped around me, as if the space itself refused to adhere to the rules that held the rest of the world together. The watch's needle shuddered again, jerking violently as though it was trying to break free from its own confines, from whatever invisible force it was tied to. I could almost hear it humming, vibrating in my hand like a trapped insect, its edges blurring in and out of focus. My breath became shallow, an effort to pull air through a collapsing tunnel. Sweat dripped from my forehead, stinging my eyes. I looked at the dashboard clock, 3:18 a.m. The same time as the failed attempt in the ledger. I wasn't supposed to make it this far. The needle in my hand jumped again, this time beyond the crescent, into the gibbous void, and everything stopped. Silence, deep and total, flooded the car, and for the briefest moment, I thought I had escaped. The engine's thrumming ceased, the vibrations in the wheel stopped. The oppressive heaviness in the air lifted. I dared to exhale. But when I opened my eyes, the room around me had changed. The garage bay seemed deeper, the walls stretched impossibly far beyond what I remembered. The flickering lights overhead, once in sync with the heartbeat, now pulsed in erratic patterns. Something about the air felt more sterile, as if a vacuum had been sucked into the space. I couldn't explain it. I could hardly feel the floor beneath my feet. My fingers, still clutching the watch, began to feel light, weightless, as if the metal was dissolving in my hand. I looked around, and there, in the far corner, a figure stood. The silhouette was unclear, shifting in and out of focus, but I could feel its gaze on me, intense, burning through the dark. A whisper vibrated in my mind, not words, but a message. You've stepped too far. The realization hit me with a cold wave, sharper than any panic. I was no longer in control. I wasn't just a passenger. The lines between the watch's rhythms, my heartbeat, and the environment around me had blurred. It was all connected, and I had overstepped the boundary. This place, this nightmare, was a construction, a web of ticking moments, a test of endurance, and I had walked its path far enough to understand its cruel logic. Before I could react, the door behind me creaked open. My gaze shot to it, and I saw the dim outline of a man standing in the doorway. He was tall, cloaked in shadows, his face obscured by a mask. The mask, familiar yet foreign, bore a design I hadn't seen before, yet somehow new, the cracked, jagged line of a clock's face, its hands frozen at midnight. Time has a price, the figure said, his voice a low rasp that seemed to come from everywhere at once. And you've paid it in full. The words settled like a heavy weight in the pit of my stomach, and my vision blurred again, the edges of reality beginning to ripple. Time had never been something I could control, something I could defy. The ticking watch had always been its master. But now I realized that it wasn't the watch that controlled time, it was the choices I made. The moments I chose to rewrite. The seconds I allowed to stretch and warp. I dropped the watch, watching it fall to the floor, the sound of its ticking the last thing I heard before everything went black. When I woke, I was back in the car. The headlights were still on, the engine was still running. The dashboard clock read 3:18 a.m. again. The watch had vanished. But the air in the car was heavier than before. There was a taste in my mouth, sharp and metallic. And as I looked into the rearview mirror, I saw something staring back, a face I knew, but didn't recognize. The watch's ticking had never truly stopped. It simply kept moving, ticking through me. The scent of brine, old wood, and something metallic tinged the air. As the road narrowed, it felt less like a passage and more like a throat, guiding me deeper into some unsaid destination. The trees thinned to reveal a long-forgotten town, its bones creaking in the wind. Faded signs hung loosely on rusted poles, swinging like forgotten dreams. The pavement here buckled, as if reluctant to admit the cars that once traveled it. Something about the stillness felt oppressive, as if the land had been holding its breath for years. I slowed down, wondering why I'd even ventured in this direction. The map hadn't given much more than a blip next to the name, Caligo Cove, but it beckoned in some primal way. Something unexplored. Something buried. The only sound was the engine's hum and the occasional flick of a broken streetlight above. As I passed the first house, I noticed how the windows were all shut tight, not a single light visible inside. The shadows they cast were long, stretching unnaturally across the cracked sidewalks. The first building I came to was a store, or had been once. Its wooden frame sagged under decades of neglect. The sign, partially obscured by peeling paint, read, Caligo General Supply. The door was ajar, but the air smelled too stale for anything human to still reside there. Yet, something tugged at me. I parked the car and got out, the sound of my shoes on the cracked concrete far too loud in the silence. My hands shook as I reached for the door handle. The hinges creaked as it opened, the scent of old paper, salt, and something faintly metallic wafting out like a forgotten secret. Inside, the shelves were empty, save for a few rusted cans and some shattered glass. The floor was littered with debris, broken light bulbs, old receipts, torn newspapers. But in the back of the room, something caught my eye. There, behind a stack of crumbling boxes, a large, weathered map was pinned to the wall. It was not the map of Caligo Cove that I expected. No. This map was a strange, circular representation of a coastline I didn't recognize. Its lines were bold and sprawling, as though it had been drawn by hand rather than printed. And in the center, a single mark. A jagged circle, drawn with a thick, black marker. I stepped closer to examine it. A strange feeling tugged at my gut as I traced my fingers along the map's edge, noting the other marks scattered around it, small symbols, shapes, that seemed to pulse with some kind of ominous energy. The more I looked, the less it seemed like a map. It was as if it was alive, the lines shifting subtly under my fingertips. A chill ran through me, and I stepped back, heart racing. That's when I heard it, the faintest sound of something skittering behind me, too quick to place. I spun around. Nothing. Just the cluttered shelves and the faint thud of my own heartbeat in my ears. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves, but the air felt thick with the weight of something unseen. I glanced back at the map, my pulse quickening as I realized it wasn't just a map of the town. It seemed to be drawing me in, as though it wanted me to follow its lines. The jagged circle. The pull was undeniable, urging me toward the center, toward whatever it was hiding. Before I could step back, a noise echoed through the store, a low, gurgling sound, like water rising from underground. Panic surged, and I bolted for the door. But as I passed, my eyes caught the last of the map's strange symbols, a single word written in sharp, angular script. Return. I froze. The word hit me like a slap. I didn't know why, but it felt like a command. Something ancient, desperate. I stared at the door. It felt like a trap. Like the air outside was thinner, colder. The world felt wrong, bent in ways I couldn't understand. I knew I had to leave. I had to get out of here. I stepped out into the street and stopped, looking around at the eerie town. The silence seemed to hold its breath as if waiting for something to happen. Something had followed me. Something had seen me. The air seemed to thicken with each step I took toward my car. Then, a creaking noise echoed from behind me. I spun around. A figure stood at the entrance of the shop, backlit by the dull glow of the streetlight. It was tall, its outline vague and distorted, like it couldn't quite decide what shape it wanted to take. A cloak of mist wrapped around it, obscuring the face. But I could feel it, its eyes, like the map, pulling me in. And before I could move, the figure whispered one word. Return. I didn't wait. The door slammed shut behind me as I fumbled for my keys. I didn't look back. Not even once. The car roared to life as I sped away from Caligo Cove, from the house, from the map. But in the rear view, I could still see it, its shadow in the mist, still watching. The question gnawed at me as I left. What had I seen? What had followed me? And would it ever stop? The tide continued its slow, deliberate rise, creeping up the street like the pulse of the earth itself, a silent force that folded time and space into its grasp. I watched as the water absorbed the village, each inch swallowed with terrifying precision. The houses vanished beneath the rising sea, their walls becoming submerged like some ancient relic rediscovered. But the villagers didn't falter. They stood in place, rooted in the unchanging stillness of their watery world, eyes glowing with a knowing calm. The camera's lens caught their faces as the sea rose higher, but the act of photographing them felt less like capturing a moment and more like stepping into one. The shutter clicked again and again, the sound echoing off the liquid surface as if time was bending around my every movement. With each shot, the villagers' bodies blurred and refracted, their outlines shimmering, as though they were part of the very elements they existed within. The thin crust on my hand cracked again as my pulse quickened, the veins beneath my skin feeling as though they were being pulled through glass. And then, there was the chapel, or what remained of it. The doors, wide open despite the rising tide, beckoned me. The villagers were already moving toward it, forming a procession that flowed with the rhythm of the water, their bodies casting off trails of mist as they crossed the wet street. A single figure emerged from the chapel doorway, draped in a flowing cloak made of light itself. His face, though partially obscured by a veil of shimmering fog, was regal, ancient, as though he had been there long before the tides began. He held his arms wide, palms open to the sea, to the sky, and to the village, an invitation. I wanted to run. My feet trembled, and my mind screamed for escape, but my body felt as though it was rooted to the spot. My breath came in shallow bursts, the air tasting like salt water and memory. The villagers parted before the cloaked figure as he reached the center of the street, allowing him to stand before me as though the procession was not only for the sea but for me, too. His eyes, empty hollows, seemed to pierce through me, acknowledging something I hadn't even begun to understand. The air thickened. The sea stopped its steady advance, and for a brief moment, the village was frozen. The world held its breath, waiting for something unseen to unfold. My camera clicked once more, but this time it didn't feel like a capture. It felt like a release. The figure reached out slowly, fingers curling toward me, and a voice, not spoken but felt inside my head, filled the silence. It was deep, resonant, as if it had echoed through the very bones of the earth. The tide is not a curse, but a gift. A return. A reclaiming of what has been lost. You have come to bear witness, but the tide does not wait. It does not forgive. I stood frozen, unable to respond. The weight of his words pressed against me like an invisible tide of its own, pushing me closer to the edge of the unknown. The villagers, their bodies now nearly transparent in the water's embrace, stared at me with a collective silence, their eyes wide and unblinking. The mist around them thickened, drawing me into its strange pull. In an instant, the ground beneath my feet began to tremble. The chapel's doors creaked, and the tide surged forward again, faster this time, swallowing the village whole, claiming its rightful place. The cloaked figure raised his hands to the sky, as though summoning the water, and I felt the pull of the sea, the weight of its ancient power. The camera in my hands became unbearably heavy, as though it was tethered to something far beyond me, beyond the village. I couldn't move it, couldn't release it from my grasp. The waves, thick and unyielding, began to swirl around my feet, climbing higher, sweeping away the sand beneath me. The last image of the village, of the villagers and the cloaked figure, was etched into my mind like a brand. But as the water reached my knees, I couldn't look away. My fingers slowly, involuntarily, moved the camera into position. One more shot, one more image, this time of the sea reclaiming everything in its path. The shutter clicked. And everything disappeared. The screen flickered as I stared at the metadata field, unable to comprehend what my eyes were telling me. Exposure remaining, it stood there, a cold command hanging above the photograph's details, waiting for my next move. How could that be? The images were perfect, flawless. I had taken the shot, the last click, the final frame. Yet something in the metadata suggested I hadn't truly finished, hadn't sealed the deal. I sat back, pulse still racing. The hum of the computer, the familiar click of keys under my fingertips, now felt strange, alien. As if something was observing, waiting for me to interact with the image again, as though my own decisions were no longer entirely my own. The whispers from the village echoed in my ears, the collective murmur of 1,000 voices woven together in judgment, in anticipation. You saw what you sought. Now show the world or return and finish the crystallization. Those words, those thin, insistent whispers, flooded my mind once more. I gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles turning white, and pushed myself upright. The digital clock on the wall blinked 2:13 a.m. The usual silence of my studio felt oppressive, heavy with something I couldn't shake. The air seemed thicker, the walls too close. I needed to act, to erase this, to stop it before the entire process consumed me. My hand hovered over the mouse. Exposure remaining. I clicked the image open. The figures in the photograph, those crystallized villagers, their bodies poised in eerie stillness, seemed to look at me, their hollow eyes glowing faintly, their frozen expressions locked in judgment. The water beneath them shimmered, not the way the sea usually did, but like a pane of glass. Their faces wavered, and for a second, I thought I saw a shadow behind them. It moved with the slow grace of something alive. The figures leaned forward in the photo, and just as I was about to scroll down and dismiss the image, the camera froze. My stomach turned. This wasn't just a photo, it wasn't just about capturing moments frozen in time. This was a tether, an opening into something beyond the lens. A bargain made long ago in the village's tide, now returning to demand its due. I forced myself to focus, to do what was required. The next click was slow. The next movement was measured. My breath hitched as the cursor lingered over the publish button. Every part of me screamed to turn away, to leave it all behind. But that whisper, that harsh voice, still lingered in my ears. Show the world or return and finish the crystallization. I wasn't ready for this, but what could I do? I clicked. The moment I did, the air around me changed. It felt like the room exhaled, suddenly colder, denser, the walls pressing inward like something living, something ancient. And then, a sound. A deep, resonant hum. Low, like the vibrations of a distant storm gathering. The hum filled the studio, vibrating the air, thudding deep in my chest, in my very bones. The monitor flickered, the screen distorting as the photo loaded one last time. The villagers' faces, they weren't still anymore. They moved, shifting, their eyes narrowing, lips parting into slow, deliberate smiles. The sea behind them pulsed. It moved. A single word formed in the image. Complete. A deep dread settled in my stomach. It was too late. But there, at the edge of my vision, in the corner of the frame, a new figure emerged. Not from the photo, but from the very room. An outline, rising slowly, made of the same translucent crystalline form as the villagers, only this one was different. It was taller, more angular. The skin glistened like salt and glass, fractured under the studio's light. Its hollow eyes fixed on me with unnerving intensity. I backed away from the screen, stumbling, but it didn't follow. At least not in the way I expected. The figure remained still, watching as the studio filled with the low hum, the sounds of waves crashing, the scent of salt filling the air. My pulse quickened, racing far beyond my control. The figure shifted, its movement subtle, until it reached the edge of the screen. It lifted a hand, extending it toward me. No words, just that whisper in my head. The sound of waves lapping against distant shores. Suddenly, the figure was gone. I sat there, staring at the empty screen. My hands trembled, my skin prickled, the hairs on the back of my neck standing straight. The sound of the sea in my ears. The weight of those hollow eyes still pressing into my mind. The photograph was finished. It was complete. The vision pulled me in deeper, sweeping me away from the basement, from the stone walls and glass jars, to a place I'd never been. The shore was cold, the horizon painted in soft orange hues. The gulls, their caws like distant echoes, circled lazily above the water, their wings catching the early morning light. I could feel the sand between my toes, gritty and damp from the tide. It smelled familiar, like childhood mornings by the ocean, but I couldn't recall the exact place. The laughter, so clear, so full of life, sounded like it belonged to someone else, yet it resonated within me, a pang of longing that was both foreign and intimate. I turned, half expecting to see someone from my past, but there was no one. Only the vast expanse of the beach and the gentle surf lapping at the shore. The scent of the jar, roasted chestnuts and the dusty scent of old books, lingered in my senses, the sensation of that moment on the beach flickering like an old film reel. The memories of a time that was not mine, a place I hadn't visited, tugged at me, trying to weave themselves into the fabric of who I was. My chest tightened, as if the air itself was pushing in, reminding me that this moment, this strange, vivid moment, was a product of the jar's contents, not a reality. I set the jar back down, the weight of the illusion slowly lifting as I stepped away from the bench. The basement's chill settled over me once more, and the images of the shoreline, the gulls, and the laughter slowly blurred. The smell faded, the wind ceased to rush through my hair. Yet something about it remained lodged in my chest, a fragment that would not be easily forgotten. I didn't know what to make of it. The jars on the shelves, their contents swirling with secrets and forgotten pieces of time, were all part of something far larger than I could comprehend. They held memories, real or imagined, that seemed to reach into the very marrow of existence, pulling fragments from lives that may never have been mine but felt as though they were. Each jar, a snapshot, a moment in time, frozen and sealed away. The clink from the jars continued, almost in rhythm, as if something inside was still restless, waiting for release. My fingers brushed against another jar, this one larger, its contents thick with a swirling black mist. I hesitated before lifting it, the air around me tightening. The moment I touched the wax, a shudder ran through the floorboards beneath my feet. The basement groaned, the walls seeming to breathe with an unnatural pulse. Suddenly, a face appeared inside the glass. A woman's face, obscured by the fog, her eyes wide with silent fear. I jerked back, heart slamming in my chest. She wasn't real, couldn't be real. Yet her presence felt as if it had been waiting for me, watching me, hidden beneath layers of time. I dropped the jar, its contents rattling within as it hit the stone floor. The face inside the glass vanished, but the weight of its gaze remained, pressing against my thoughts, lingering at the edges of my mind. I took a step back, my mind racing. The jars, the smells, the visions, they were too much. I wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't just some old inn with strange curiosities. No, this place was a repository, a keeper of memories, lost and trapped, waiting for someone to unravel them. And I was that someone. I had wandered too far into this place, drawn in by something darker than curiosity. The ground beneath me shifted again, and the chime of the jars seemed to grow louder, echoing through the floor and walls. I didn't know how much more I could take. The thought of escaping, the door to the inn above me, the quiet night air, the distance between me and the madness that bubbled here, became an urgent need. But when I reached the stairs, I hesitated. The floor groaned beneath me, as though urging me to stay. And from the corner of my eye, I saw the jar I had dropped, its contents still swirling, beckoning me back. I could leave, or I could return. But I knew, deep down, that whichever choice I made, the inn had already marked me. The faces in the glass, the shifting air, and the salty fog were never going to let me go. Not really. The air above felt thicker, as though the weight of the basement's shadows pressed against my back, refusing to release me. The narrow staircase stretched upward, each step heavy, as if the wood had grown roots into the earth below. With every inch gained, I felt something else slipping further into the depths of that strange, cold room, a piece of me I could no longer name. My pulse slowed, but my skin remained tight, suffocating under the tension I had bargained into existence. At the top of the stairs, the tapestry fluttered once more. The house exhaled a long, low creak that rattled the plaster. I paused, bracing myself for what awaited me. The hall stretched before me, bathed in moonlight filtering through dust-choked windows. For a brief moment, the world outside seemed as unreal as the world below, locked in a forgotten time. The door was open, inviting me to leave, yet every step I took felt like I was walking back into something already behind me. A sharp scent cut through the air, the scent of new earth, of growth, and of something ancient. My hand reached for the doorknob, but I stopped. My fingers hovered inches from the cold brass, remembering. The air around me seemed to thicken, like something waiting just outside my line of vision. A part of me had let go of the fear, embraced the unfamiliar. But the other part, my heart, my instinct, held tight. The basement, the exchange, the promise, they all circled around me, closing in like fog, too intimate to escape. I took a breath and opened the door. Night outside hung heavy with stillness. The world was waiting. For me. The streetlights flickered at the edges of the lane, and the air was cold, but alive with the kind of silence that only comes when everything is settled. The quiet felt wrong. Something unfinished clung to me. I stepped out, my boots sinking softly into the dirt. The road ahead seemed longer now, even though it had never changed. The distant rustle of trees seemed amplified, sharper than I remembered. The woman's voice from below still hummed at the edges of my thoughts. The promise, the transaction. I hadn't fully understood it until now. Every breath I took in the world above felt like a new currency. The scent that clung to me was mine, yet somehow not, something borrowed, something fragile. The town around me, still and deserted, seemed as abandoned as the inn itself, though the shadows lingered longer than they should. The moon rose, casting silver light over the ground, but it felt muted, as if the night had been dimmed intentionally. My footsteps echoed in the empty streets, loud in the thick air. With each step, the feeling of being watched intensified, but when I glanced over my shoulder, there was no one. I passed the inn again, its lights still flickering in an odd rhythm, but now, the house no longer looked welcoming. The quiet was different, pressing in on me, a weight that felt tied to that jar I had left behind in the basement. The road beyond it seemed to open up, but I hesitated. The scent in the vial, the one I had crafted, a fragrance not of the past, but of the future, settled deeper in my chest. It felt like I had given up something irretrievable, something woven into the fabric of who I was, only to receive a fleeting gift in return. The irony made my skin prickle. I wanted to walk away, to escape the town, the woman, the whole strange transaction, but the path ahead shimmered in my mind like a mirage. No matter how fast I walked, it remained just out of reach. The road stretched into the horizon, empty and endless, like a story waiting to be told. As I walked further into the night, the whisper of the house followed me, softer now, like a warning I couldn't quite hear, but felt in the depths of my ribs. Finish the trace. The words, quiet and persistent, were not mine, yet they felt more like my own than anything I had ever said aloud. The transaction wasn't complete. The story wasn't over. And no matter how far I walked, the place, the house, the basement, the salt exchange, was waiting, just beyond the next step. And that was the cost of promises. The road ahead was mine, but it would always curve back into something unfinished. I took a step forward, drawn toward the massive clock. Its presence seemed to draw the very air, pulling everything into its gravitational pull. The words on the dial flickered, as if they were alive, shifting ever so slightly under the dim light, an unreadable message taunting my eyes. The red pointer moved again, the faintest pulse toward fear, and with it, the whispering returned. This time, it was louder, sharper, curling around the edges of my thoughts. The ticking grew louder, syncing with my heartbeat, and my head buzzed, as though the air itself was vibrating with something ancient, something malevolent. I felt the sweat on my palms, cold against the metal of the crowbar still gripped in my hand. The house creaked under the strain of its own weight, and the clocks, all of them, seemed to respond in unison, their second hands skittering in disjointed, frantic movements. It was as though they were fighting against something unseen, trying to break free of their own constraints. My throat tightened. I could barely breathe, the air feeling thick, full of unspoken promises and old regrets. Every instinct in me screamed to leave, to bolt down the stairs and never return to this place again. But something rooted me to the spot. The ticking slowed, then accelerated in sporadic bursts, until it began to feel like a countdown. Countdown to what? The question echoed through my mind, but I couldn't quite form the answer. My eyes darted around the attic, absorbing the chaos of time itself fragmented around me. 100 clocks, each one a frozen moment, each one connected by the pulse of the ticking that seemed to orchestrate the room like a warped symphony. I took another step toward the grand regulator, my footfall muffled by the thick dust coating the floor. Then I saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement from the farthest corner of the room. A shadow. It was nothing like the shadow of the rafters, or the shadows cast by the flickering bulb. This shadow moved on its own, twisting like smoke, stretching across the wall, pulling the very light toward it. It was watching me. I froze, heart slamming into my ribs. The whispering words from the clocks grew clearer, though not in any recognizable language. It was as if the clocks themselves were speaking directly into my mind, words I couldn't understand but somehow felt I needed to. Fear, the dial whispered. Fear at 12. I closed my eyes for a brief second, forcing myself to take a long, steadying breath. My body felt as if it was on the brink of collapse. I opened them again, focusing on the red pointer inching toward fear. A strange sensation swept over me, like the air had thickened with pressure, and my skin was tightening as if it, too, was trying to escape. The shadow shifted again, its edges too jagged, too deliberate. Then it stopped. My heart nearly stopped with it. The ticking from the clock slowed to an agonizing crawl, every second drawn out in eerie suspense. It was waiting for me to make a choice. I knew then that the clock, the house, the very air was tied to something far older than I could comprehend. There was a story unfolding, one written in the flickers of these broken timepieces, a story I had somehow become a part of. The red pointer ticked again, this time almost imperceptibly. My eyes shot back to it. The pulse of time had reached its mark, but what would happen when the pointer finally aligned with the word fear? What would it take? The air thickened, the atmosphere pressing harder against my chest, suffocating me. I felt as if I were being pulled into the very mechanism of the clock, as if the story that was being told would trap me inside the ticking, stealing every piece of my past and leaving nothing but a shadow behind. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on the floorboards as the sound of the ticking grew louder, quicker, echoing in my skull. I had no idea what was happening, but I knew this moment wasn't just another passing chapter, it was the final stroke. And the clock would not stop until it was finished. I turned, the crowbar slipping from my hands, and made for the stairs. Each step felt like it took me further from my own self, the pressure building, the whispers turning into a crescendo of words I couldn't decipher. You cannot outrun time, they seemed to say. The house felt alive now, suffocating in its awareness. I reached the door, nearly tripping on the threshold. Just before I slammed it shut, I heard one final whisper, carried through the weight of the house. Return what you have taken. Before the clock reaches its end. The door slammed shut behind me, the room of broken clocks falling away as I sprinted down the stairs. The house was no longer waiting, it was breathing, alive, and it wanted me back. But my fingers froze on the handle. Something stopped me. I hesitated, listening. The silence now felt different. The whispers, once maddening, had receded into a low hum, an almost comforting presence, like the faintest melody that seemed to tug at the edges of memory. For a moment, it felt as though the attic had calmed, as though the weight pressing down on me had lifted, leaving only a gentle thrum in the air. But it was the quiet that unsettled me most. I turned to face the room. The walls, once suffocating in their close presence, now felt distant. The clocks, though still ticking steadily, were no longer urgent. Their hands, though aligned, seemed as though they too were waiting. Watching. They no longer demanded confession or suffering. The air felt heavy with a stillness that suggested something was complete. Something finished. But what had I truly released? Was it the truth? Or had I simply acquiesced to the attic's need, allowing it to drain me of something deeper than my guilt? Was it my soul? My memory? The words, "Finish what you've started," circled my mind like a whispering echo. I stepped away from the regulator, looking around the room one final time. I couldn't shake the feeling that the attic had been here long before me, and it would remain long after I was gone. I could close the door, lock it up, and forget. Or I could confront the truth, that the attic didn't just contain regrets and guilt. It held all of it. Every choice, every misstep, every sorrow. And once you entered it, you left a part of yourself behind. I touched the worn edges of the wooden stairs, my hand trembling. It was clear now, this house, this attic, was a prison of memories, but not just mine. All those who had walked this path, who had passed through its doors, had left fragments behind. And I was no different. I had taken, confessed, and surrendered. But was it enough? I shook my head, dismissing the thought as irrational. I had done my part. The attic had been silenced, the clocks had aligned, and the weight had lifted. But as I turned to leave, the faintest sound echoed in the distance. A ticking. So faint, so soft, it might have been a trick of the air. I didn't turn back. I couldn't. And yet, as I crossed the threshold, I felt an unsettling truth settle deep in my chest: the attic had never really let me go. The door slammed shut behind me with an unnatural finality, and I realized the whispers had not gone. They had simply grown quieter. As I descended the stairs, the house seemed to breathe with me, every creak and groan an unspoken invitation. This wasn't over. But for now, I would leave. Just for a while. Just long enough to believe I was free. For now. The first hint of unease came when the last image loaded. It wasn't of the street I had walked down. It was of a building, an old industrial block, the kind you barely notice in the city's underbelly. It was a place I had passed earlier in the day, but I hadn't stopped to photograph it. I had simply walked past, too focused on the next location, the next shot. Yet, there it was, right in front of me on the screen, a perfect, clean image of the building, its cracked windows gleaming in the dim streetlight, a faded sign barely visible above the door. I froze. The photo was too precise. The angles, the shadow placement, everything about it was far too specific. It wasn't like any of the random shots I usually took while on a walk, where my camera lazily captured whatever my eye fell on. This felt deliberate, crafted, almost as though the image had been waiting for me to snap it, no matter how fast I'd been walking. I swiped the mouse to close it, but my finger lingered over the screen. Something was pulling at the edge of my mind, something faint but real. The building, the one I had passed by hours earlier, seemed off. The image wasn't right. It wasn't just that it appeared out of place, it felt familiar. And that's when the second shot appeared. It wasn't a shot I'd taken. I hadn't pressed the shutter. But there it was, the very same building, but this time, the camera angle was different. The door of the building was slightly ajar, the light inside dim, but undeniably there. And in the doorway, I could make out the shadow of a person, too sharp to be a passerby. Too intentional. I leaned closer to the screen, breath held. I hadn't taken that photo. The strange thing, though, was that I could feel myself taking it. My fingers, not just my hands, but my eyes, my whole body, the camera, as if the shot had been carved out of me instead of the world around me. The monitor flickered. The next image came up, and my breath caught in my throat. The third image was closer, much closer. The door was wide open now. I could almost feel the cold air from the abandoned interior rushing past me. And standing just inside, barely visible in the shadow, was me. A reflection of myself, but not like the me I knew. This version was older, more weathered, like an earlier version of me left behind in time. This wasn't a figure I had seen today, but a different version of myself, as though I had lived out this exact scene, countless times, in a different reality. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. My mouth was dry. The camera, it had to be the camera. But as I tried to remember when I had even snapped the first shot, my mind felt fogged, distant, as if the memory of that moment had been wiped clean as soon as I clicked the shutter. I hadn't captured the image. Someone had, and the images were getting too specific, too close. Too real. The fourth image appeared on the screen. It was a close-up. It was no longer a photo of the building at all. It was my face. Barely visible, but unmistakably mine. The image was grainy, dark, but the reflection was somehow sharper than anything I had ever taken. It was me looking back at the camera. But my eyes were different. They were dark, voids, and there was something in them. A warning. A reflection from another time. I sat there in complete silence, the hum of the monitor the only sound. I couldn't bring myself to turn off the screen. I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead. I leaned closer, my reflection now staring back at me from the dark depths of the monitor. And that's when it hit me. I hadn't taken these photos. Someone, or something, had been capturing my every move, stepping inside my mind, placing images in my hands, as if I were the subject, but the observer too. The feeling of being watched was suffocating. Then the screen flickered again, and I saw the last image. My pulse raced, my skin went cold. The image was of the same building, now completely dark, save for a single light flickering inside the door. The final detail made my stomach lurch. Someone was standing just inside, but it wasn't my reflection. It was someone else, a figure I didn't recognize, but their face was so familiar, as if it were a distorted version of my own, an older, twisted reflection staring out of a future I didn't understand. The image was a warning. It wasn't meant for me to view, it was meant for me to walk toward. I grabbed my jacket, slipping into the shadows of the room. The chill of the building was nothing compared to the cold creeping into my veins. Something in me told me not to go, that stepping into the images was inviting more than I could understand. But I was already standing in the doorway, unable to turn away from the pull of the pictures I hadn't taken, the places I hadn't seen. The camera had captured me. But now, it was time for me to capture my own fate. The door was waiting for me. The story you've written weaves an eerie narrative that explores the unsettling effects of photography and the ways images can bleed into reality, bending time and memory in unsettling ways. The protagonist's journey is marked by the chilling effects of capturing the world through a lens, which ultimately leads to a series of impossible events where reality itself begins to unravel. The central metaphor of the camera as both a tool and a prison is particularly striking, with each photograph triggering not only the protagonist's own disintegration but the fabric of the world around him. As he photographs the lighthouse, an unknowable force begins to capture him as well, turning the images into something more than mere pictures, but keys to a different dimension, one where his very existence is at risk. The discovery that the camera can create and destroy, capture and distort, makes for an intense and haunting exploration of artistic obsession, guilt, and the power of documentation. The copy of himself, deteriorating into sand, represents the consequences of living as a passive observer, unable to truly influence or escape from the forces one sets in motion. The tension between the copy's empathetic existence and its inevitable collapse is a striking commentary on the human fear of being consumed by one's own creations, and how often, in trying to capture a moment, we end up losing ourselves in the process. The writing overall builds suspense through sensory detail, the scent of brine, the feeling of sand on the skin, the ticking of clocks, and the hissing whispers, creating a thick atmosphere of dread and inevitability. By the end, the protagonist is left with a haunting reminder: no matter how hard he tries to erase the evidence of his experience, it clings to him, waiting in the shadows, as the line between the world he knows and the world he captured continues to blur. There's a sharp sense of finality in the last paragraph, where the protagonist locks the drawer and feels the grains of sand slipping in through cracks in time, reminding him that the echoes of this world, and the images he captured, will never truly let go.